What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Magic the Gathering conversation. We will be going over the list of cards from various Magic the Gathering sets in the next couple of months. We're going to be doing, not every week, but periodically throughout the week, we'll be doing such videos. And we are starting with the very first Magic set. Things are going to be a little different there because when the first set was known as Alpha. Alpha came out with 295 cards, and it came out August 5th, 1993. There are a few problems though with the cards, or not with the cards, but the set itself. Two cards from the set did not make it print-wise, so a couple months later in October, they re-released the game with the missing cards plus additional artwork for each of the 5 basic lands. And that set is known as Beta. So Alpha and Beta pretty much have the same cards in it. Beta just has the additional cards from the set that were missing. And then later on, a couple months later, in December, Magic would re-release the Alpha/Beta sets as unlimited, and they would lose their black border and they would be white bordered versions of the same cards before they would make their new expansions the following year. So we're going to just head into it. We're going to view these cards in alphabetical order. I'm using the website Scryfall. It had the best comprehensive and clearest pictures for the cards so that I could show you guys. And for the cards themselves, I'm going to talk about the artwork, whether I owned or used the cards or not, my thoughts on them overall, and then at the end, I'll list which card was my favorite from the set. So let's begin with the first creature alphabetically in Magic the Gathering, Air Elemental. 5 mana, 4/4 flying elemental. Pretty beefy for a blue creature. Blue creatures aren't really that strong. And it has flying. Blue has a lot of flying creatures though. So flying was a real big deal because half the creatures in the game at the time couldn't block this creature. So he was pretty strong, 4/4, no drawback whatsoever. Only drawback to this card was probably the 5 mana, but back then there was nothing to compare it to. So it was a good beat stick for blue at the time. Nowadays, 5 mana, 4/4 flying with no abilities is definitely outclassed compared to some of the cards that exist now. But again, all these cards are going to be what the game evolved from, because these were the first Magic the Gathering cards. So overall, I like Air Elemental. There's nothing wrong with it. The artwork looks cool. Air Elemental will be reprinted in several sets in the future with updated artwork, and we will see those in future streams. Next up, we have Ancestral Recall. Definitely one of the most powerful cards in the game. For 1 blue mana, you just get to draw 3 cards, or you can have your opponent draw 3 cards if you wish. It would later be, the text would change to target player draws 3 cards. Card draw is a powerful mechanic in this game. The more cards that you're able to draw means the more answers you have against your opponent. For those of you who are familiar with the game, the term Power 9 was the 9 most powerful cards in Magic the Gathering, period. And Ancestral Recall is one of those 9 cards. Again, just the power to just draw 3 cards for just 1 blue mana was definitely, and still is to this day, overpowered. Hence the name Power 9. Ancestral Recall will be, they had different versions of it printed in future sets, but they would have some drawbacks to it, or the mana cost would be more expensive than just 1 blue mana. Definitely a great card. Nothing wrong with it whatsoever. It was an instant too, so you could play it on your opponent's turn. If you didn't have any counter spells in your hand and you needed an answer for an opponent's spell and you had the mana open, you could just draw 3 cards, and if you did get the counter spell and if you still had the mana open, you would get your answer to their card right there. There's a reason why it was Power 9. Let's look what it's worth too. Collector's edition is worth $450. All prices change and stuff, so I'm not really gonna go over the prices of cards and stuff. I was just curious for Ancestral Recall. Animate Artifact. 4 mana, enchant a non-creature artifact. Target artifact is now a creature with both power and toughness equal to its casting cost. The target keeps its original abilities. If the artifact has 0 casting cost, it will destroy it. There are several incarnations of animating artifacts in Magic, but this was the first one. 4 mana is a little costly to be able to do that, and I don't know right off the bat from memory any large mana artifacts that would have benefited from this. I know you could, there are several artifacts that didn't cost anything, like the Moxes, which we'll see later on. If you put this on the opponent's Mox, it would automatically destroy it. But once you get 4 mana, they probably already used as much mana from their Moxes since the turn they played them. So it was an expensive way to get rid of their artifacts if they had 0 casting cost. Next up, Animate Dead. 2 mana, 1 black, 1 colorless. Any creature in either player's graveyard comes into play on your side of the field with -1 to its power. If this enchantment is removed, that creature is returned to its owner's graveyard. So for just 2 mana, you could bring any creature that from any graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Definitely a strong card. If you eliminated your opponent's threat, you could use it against them later on in the game once you had Animate Dead. But your opponent did have an answer to it. If they were able to remove the enchantment somehow, then the creature would go back to the graveyard. We'll see a lot of graveyard recursion deck strategies and cards in the future of the game. Animate Wall. For 1 white, target wall can now attack. That wall's power and toughness is unchanged even if its power is 0. I like the little artwork. There's like a little grumpy face, and they gave the wall little feet and toes here with the stubby arms and the fingers. That's funny. The rules for walls were that walls could never attack. It makes sense because a wall is not even really a living object. Years later, when Champions of Kamigawa came out, Magic implemented the rule that all walls would have the keyword defender, which was a rule text ability saying that just walls couldn't attack. There are cards in the future that do enable creatures with defender to attack. That's how this would be enabled today. This card would probably say something like target creature with defender can attack as though it didn't have defender. That's exactly what that card would most likely say. Ankh of Mishra. For 2 colorless mana, Ankh does 2 damage to anyone who puts a land into play. So I actually owned this card. I had 4 copies of it because you're only allowed to use 4 copies at a time. And what I would do is I would destroy the opponent's lands with various cards, or I would use cards that would like destroy their artifact or something, and then they would be able to search the library for a land and put it into play. And then Ankh of Mishra would deal 2 damage to them. So I would either force them to play lands and take damage, or I would shut down their mana pool altogether, and they won't be able to play any spells. Unfortunately, to get some major use out of it, I mean, I could see it good in a burn deck. If the opponent, if you run out of burn spells, you can at least keep the opponent's life total in check, depending on how many land that they need. And it could stop them from playing bigger spells in the future. But the card does bring back nostalgic memories. I only used it in that one deck, and then I've never used it again. Armageddon. Speaking of destroying lands, I did run this card with the Ankh of Mishra. All lands in play are destroyed. So what I would do is I would have artifacts that tap for mana. So once I had enough to where I could still play my cards with those artifacts, I would drop Armageddon, destroying all lands in play. I'd still be able to do things with my artifacts, while my opponent was most likely crippled at that point. Definitely a great card. Having white, having the ability to destroy lands is just crazy. White can do almost anything in the game. And we'll see more variations of that in the future as well. Aspect of Wolf. Target creature's power and toughness is increased by half the number of forests you have in play, rounded down for power and up for toughness. That's weird that one stat is rounded down and one stat is rounded up. I do remember using this card. I had Magic the Gathering for the PC. It took place. I think it took place in Chandelar. That's the background music that's playing right now. And I used this card in my green decks, but I never owned the card. A lot of these cards I didn't own because I didn't start playing Magic until 1997. But I do remember the artwork on this card. I do like wolves, and back in the day, the artwork for it was pretty cool. I did like, that's what got me into Magic in the first place, the artwork. Next up, we have Badlands. Badlands counts as a mountain and a swamp. These were the first dual lands to be ever created in Magic. The dual lands were able, they set you up to where you could build 2-color decks, sometimes even 3-color decks with more ease, because the land, if you needed a red or a black, it could tap for whatever you needed of the corresponding color. If one turn you needed to play something that's all red, and if the other turn you needed to play something that's all black, that would help you out. Next up, Bad Moon. For 2 mana, all black creatures get +1/+1. This also includes your opponent's creatures as well, so if you are up against an opposing player with black creatures as well, it would give them the power too. Nowadays, we don't see that many cards that affect all creatures in play. They just affect yours. But if you weren't against another black deck, this card was amazing. Black doesn't really have much all creatures get +1/+1 cards anymore, unless it's like a specific creature type, like all zombies or all rats. So this just made any deck that you would swarm with black creatures, it made each of those creatures that much more deadly. I did have, there was this Magic set called Time Spiral where they reprinted some old cards from sets in the past, and Bad Moon was one of them. I did own the card at one point. Balance. Whichever player has more lands in play must discard enough lands to his or her choice equal to the number of lands both players have in play. Cards in hand are treated the same way, and creatures are treated in the same way. So pretty much everyone sacrifices down to the same creatures, lands, and cards in hand. Balance was used in a lot of control decks back in the day. I do like the artwork of like this Crusader Knight holding up scales that are almost evenly balanced, but he's holding it up in the air, so of course gravity's going to kind of move these weights. Basalt Monolith, 3 mana, tap to add 3 colors mana to your mana pool. It does not untap during your untap step. You must pay 3 to untap it. At the time, if you needed a quick mana for a spell on the next turn or something, it was useful, but then it was a dead artifact until you had the 3 mana to be able to use it again in a future turn. I do like the artwork for it. The sky looks cool. It's trees. It gives like a African vibe, or like this is in like a desert or a desert evening or something like that. I don't know. The colors are great, but I never used the card itself. The Bayou, another one of the dual lands. This is for black and green. This counted as both a swamp and a forest. Me being from Florida, I do like swamps. And when I first started playing Magic, I told myself I was only going to play black, or green, or any combination of the two. And then eventually I got into red because red had a lot of dragons, and I love dragons. And then I saw what blue and white could do, so I ended up deciding, let me just play with all the cards available to me in the game instead of just restricting myself to two. But black and green is my favorite combination of colors in Magic. Never had Bayou or any of the original dual lands, but these lands would be reincarnated multiple times with different drawbacks. They would either come into play tapped, or you would have to pay life for them to come into play untapped, or every time you tapped it for a color, it would deal 1 damage to you. Those eventually would be known as the pain lands. Benalish Hero, 1/1 banding. Now, here's banding was an ability in Magic that was very, very confusing. Even to this day, I don't know if I even understand it 100%. Normally, if an opponent blocks with multiple creatures, they'll choose which ones. The attacking player will choose how the blockers work. The attacking player will choose what creatures to deal damage to. But with banding kind of swapped that rule, and the defending player would choose how the damage was spread out. And creatures with banding could, quote, band together, unquote. So if you had 4 of these Benalish heroes out, and they all block together or attack together, you would essentially have 4 damage that you get to distribute how you choose among the opponent's creatures, as opposed to how the opponent would choose. Because the banding ability was so complex and confusing, Magic, Wizards of the Coast, the company that made Magic, threw that ability in the vault, and they said it will never see the light of day again. I forgot what the official term for that was for. But yeah, that ability is since retired. Another cool thing about Magic is most of the cards, and especially sets in the future, are all based off of a major story. Some of them are from existing tales and folklore and mythology. Others were made up by Wizards of the Coast themselves. So some cards had flavor text on them, which even told a little story. This said Benalia has a complex caste system that changes with the lunar year. No matter what the season, the only caste that cannot be attained by either heredity or money is that of the hero. Benalia ends up being a white aligned city from Dominaria. Dominaria is the major continent and world that Magic the Gathering takes place. It'll be years and years before Wizards of the Coast decided to explore new worlds, and in the game they're called planes. We would see new planes later on in the future. Hey Tom, how are you doing tonight? Welcome in. I know we're not gaming tonight. This is my first review stream, but thanks for stopping by. Berserk. Look at this guy. This guy's definitely going berserk. I like the red in the background. It's like a mixture of blood and anger. So for 1 green mana until end of turn, target creature's power doubles and it gets trampled. If it attacks, that creature is destroyed at the end of the turn. This spell cannot be cast after the combat phase. So you double a creature's power and it gains trample, then the creature dies after combat at the end of the turn. So if you have a 10/10, a creature with 10 power, and you used Berserk on it, it would essentially have 20 power and trample. Trample was great because even if the opponent blocked, if you still had higher attack than the blocking creature's defense, the opponent that you attack takes damage equal to the difference of the blocker's defense minus subtracted from your attacker's power. Hey Vinny, banding is the best ability ever. You would say that, you chaotic bastard. Tom's been thinking if the leaks about Switch 2 are true, then Legends will have a Switch version and a Switch 2 version that's more refined. Have they ever done that? Have they ever made, like, I guess with the Wii and the Wii U, maybe? No problem, Vinny. You can have all the banding that you want. Next up is definitely a good card, and currently my favorite card in the set. And I only say currently because I'm going to list what the card my favorite is as I go down the list. So from what we've seen so far, the Birds of Paradise is my favorite. It doesn't have any power, so it's not an offensive creature by itself at all. It only has 1 toughness, easily killed by spells. They would originally, later on, instead of being summoned mana birds, it would just be straight up birds. They fly, so they'd be able to block creatures with flying, which is good. Green does not have a lot of creatures with flying at all. But the great thing about Birds of Paradise, they only cost 1 green. In addition, you can tap them to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool for the turn. So not only could you use them in decks with multiple colors to safely cast your spells, even if you didn't have the corresponding lands, you could still tap them for the color that you needed to play. Even if you didn't use them in a multicolored deck, they still ramped your spells out, because on the first turn, you play your forest, you play your Bird of Paradise. On your second turn, if you had another forest, you can already play something for 3 mana as opposed to just 2, thanks to the birds. These would eventually be called weak creatures that could tap for mana, were nicknamed by the community Mana Dorks. The Birds of Paradise are probably the most most popular, if not overshadowed by Land of War Elves as the most popular Mana Dork. But I did have I still have a full playset of Birds of Paradise to this day. Not from Alpha or Beta. They have been reprinted in the past. I know I have one from revised that it has a white border. And I hate white bordered cards, but I got that. That was my first copy of Bird of Paradise, and I don't want to get rid of it. Tom says Pokemon hasn't done that, though they could, but this may be like Ultra Sun and Moon, where the console releases, but then they release the game on the older system. Well, we shall see. I personally am not ready for the second Switch yet. I'm not ready for any next-gen console. Moving on, we have Black Knight. 2/2 Knight for 2 black mana, protection from white, and has First Strike. First Strike's a great ability because if both creatures would die in combat, First Strike means your creature lives, but the opposing creature doesn't. Your creature deals its damage first before before eventually dying. The flavor text on Black Knight says, "Battle doesn't need a purpose. The battle is its own purpose. You don't ask why a plague spreads or a field burns. Don't ask why I fight." So it's pretty cool for the Black Knight. The artwork's cool. The horse is black. Castle in the background is kind of lume. Black Knights have always been kind of like the anti-hero character in several shows, or even the arch villain. Black Knight would be reprinted later on multiple times. I used it myself, and sure enough, Black Knight with Bad Moon in play would grant it to be like a 3/3, even stronger. Protection from white's also very important too, because that means it couldn't be killed by any white creatures or targeted by any white spells. Protection was a pain in the butt back in the day. There were not many answers against it. The only way to kill this card with a white card would probably be like Wrath of God, which destroys all creatures in play. We'll see that later on. Do I like Black Knight better than I like Birds of Paradise? I'm gonna have to go with no. I'll still stick with Birds of Paradise as my favorite. Next up, this used to be the most valuable card in Magic the Gathering's history, and by valuable I mean with the price tag on it. This card has been bought for thousands and thousands of dollars. Black Lotus, it is part of the Power 9, probably the most powerful of the Power 9. And these are the reasons why. First of all, it's a non-legendary artifact, so you could have 4 or more in your deck. It costs 0 to play, so you can just play it for free. And what it does is it will add 3 mana of any color of your choice, and then you sacrifice it. It doesn't sound like much on paper or just talking about it, but on the first turn, you play a land, then you play your Black Lotus. You sacrifice your Black Lotus and tap your land. You can already cast a spell that's 4 or less. If you had more than 1 Black Lotus in your hand, then you can play 2 Black Lotus, play your land, and then you can play something for 7. I should also mention that when the game first came out, there was no limit to how many of a card you could have in a deck. You could power your deck with 20 Black Lotuses if you wanted to. I wouldn't recommend it, but after the first set, they realized that not putting a limit on a card definitely made some cards too powerful, some decks too powerful. So then they had to do the 4-card limit before All-Right banning cards from tournament play years later. And what Vinny's talking about with Post Malone, so like I said, throughout Magic's history, Black Lotus was the holy grail for Magic the Gathering. If you had a Black Lotus, you were a legend. However, Magic made a Lord of the Rings set last year. In that Lord of the Rings set, they made an alternate art, one copy of the One Ring, and then that one card, Post Malone, the musician, singer, whatever you want to call him, he is a famous, well, he's famous for his music, but he's one of the most famous Magic the Gathering celebrities, I should say. And he said anybody who ends up getting that One Ring, he would pay up to like $2 million for it. And I think that's what he did. It was like he paid $2 million for that card. So he is the owner of the One Ring, which surpassed any kind of sale the Black Lotus ever had. But not counting the One Ring, the Black Lotus is still the most valuable Magic the Gathering card to this day. And part of the Power. Yep. Moving on from the iconic Black Lotus, we have Black Vice, this little voodoo doll, which would be later be given a name and a card itself called Stuffy Doll. It's definitely in this Vice. Artifact cost 1. If an opponent has 4 or more cards in their hand during their upkeep, which is the beginning of their turn, Black Vice does 1 damage to that opponent for each card more than 4. So it was a really strong card to play early in the game when both players have 7 cards in hand. Vinny says there have been rumors that they're making another of the One Ring. Well, then that's not really the One Ring anymore. Then it would be 2 rings. But I guess Post Malone, if he had the money to burn, then more power to him, and he made somebody's life. Whoever got that card definitely made their life, changed it. I used Black Vice in what decks did I use them in? I know I used it before. In the land destruction decks. Because if the opponent can't play any spells, he just sits there with a card with a handful of 7, and then he or she takes like 3 damage each turn until eventually they would die. Because this was a cheap card, 1 mana to cast. Definitely a cool card. Yes, it is. I do miss that. I wish Arena would like add more formats to that. Next up, we have Black Ward. Target creature gains protection from black. An enchantment for 1 white. It pretty much said your creature cannot be targeted by black spells or killed by black creatures. Again, protection was a big deal back in the day. You don't see much protection anymore because it was such a powerful ability to have. Nowadays, they have changed it to like hexproof, which means can't be targeted by. Because it also, if you were just playing a deck where your opponent was protected from the corresponding creature, you couldn't even block that creature, so it would make that creature unblockable. Yeah, I do, Vinny. I definitely do. Vinny, actually, when I see or think of Black Vice, you're the first person I think of because of that game that we had. Oh, I gotta go to the next page. Blaze of Glory. Can't say I've ever seen this card, to be honest. All the other cards that we spoke of, I have seen before. I have never seen this card. Blaze of Glory. The artwork looks 100% new to me. I have no idea what this card does. Let's find out. For 1 white, target defending creature can and must block all attacking creatures it could legally block. For example, a normal non-flying target defender can and must block all normal non-flying at once, but it cannot block any flying attackers. Controller of target defender may distribute damage among the attackers as desired. Play before defense is chosen. Alright, so this makes, if you're being attacked by multiple creatures, using this card on one of your creatures Normally, only one creature can block one creature. One creature cannot block multiple creatures unless they have the specific ability. And Blaze of Glory gives that one creature the ability to block multiple creatures that it can block. Not really repeated much in later Magic sets. I could only name 2 or 3 other cards that allow a creature to be able to block more than one. Wall of Glare. 100-handed one has a weird ability that he can block up to 99 other creatures. Very specific. I do like the artwork. I have never seen this card, so this is a pleasant surprise. Moving on, we have Blessing. For 2 white, you put it on one of your creatures, and then for every white that you pay, your creature gets +1 attack and +1 toughness until end of turn. Don't really see this ability anymore in white either. This looks like the Pope blessing some pilgrims. Blue Elemental Blast. Got this wizard shaman using some waterbender shooting gushy water. For 1 blue, you can counter a red spell or destroy a red card in play. Very powerful. You don't see this often in Magic anymore either. So, one of the creatures that we're going to see later on in this stream is Sheevan Dragon. It's was Red's first dragon and a win condition card. But this card right here for 1 blue could just destroy it. Any red card, if you try to lightning bolt opponent, you play this card, would cancel the lightning bolt. Yep, as Vinny mentioned, REB stands for Red Elemental Blast. They did have it. Red had their own version of it that would destroy a blue card in play. Definitely very powerful. Birds of Paradise is still my favorite right now. Blue Ward, just like Black Ward, target creature gains protection from blue. Bog Wraith. The artwork on this card is phenomenal. I remember seeing this card, I was like, this is cool. It reminds me of a Nazgul from Lord of the Rings. It's a 3/3 for 4 mana, kind of costly, but not too expensive. Swamp Walk. What Swamp Walk meant was this creature cannot be blocked if the opponent you're attacking has any swamps in play. So he was good against other black decks. 'Twas in the bogs of the Canobray my mate did meet an early grave. 'Twas nothing left for us to save in the peat-filled bogs of Canobray. Cool little poem story. This guy's friend was killed by the Bog Wraith. I do like the card's artwork better than Birds of Paradise, but I never used Bog. Oh, I can't say that. I did have a deck that made all lands in play swamps in addition to their land types. A lot of the creatures in my deck had Swamp Walk, and I did have 1 Bog Wraith. But I think it was the white bordered version because I did not own the black bordered alpha or beta ones. Next up is Brain Geyser for 2 blue and X. The first card that have X in its mana cost. Draw X cards or force an opponent to draw X cards. This wasn't an instant speed. It had to be done on your turn. Still a really powerful card to be able to draw cards. The more mana you had, the more cards you would draw. If you had a way to get infinite mana, which was possible, or which is possible in the game today, you could cause your opponent to draw their entire library, which would force them to be into a game over. The artwork is cool because it's like your brain's erupting with knowledge but too much knowledge could overload it. I never owned the card, but I've seen it used multiple decks online back in the day. Burrowing. For 1 red, target creature gains Mountain Walk. Just like with Swamp Walk, Mountain Walk was corresponding. If the opponent was running red with mountains, you would your creature that you give this to could not be blocked anymore by them. The mole looks funny. I wouldn't want to mess with this mole. It's got these claws and then a funny unicorn drill. Camouflage. This guy looks kind of doofy. You may rearrange your attacking creatures and place them face down, revealing which is which only after blockers have been chosen. If this results in impossible blocking, such as non-flying creatures blocking flying creatures, illegal blockers cannot block this turn. I never knew this card existed. I don't even think I've ever seen the artwork. So this might have inspired Magic's Morph ability later on in the years. I did not know there was a card that turned all your attacking creatures face down, and that they ended up having to try to guess which creature was which when it came to blocking. And then if they blocked incorrectly, then they couldn't block at all. It's interesting that I'm learning about new cards I never knew existed. Next up is Castle for 4 mana. Your untapped creatures get +2 toughness. Attacking creatures do not get this bonus. So if your creatures have vigilance, they still don't get the +2 to their toughness. It just made probably your walls and blocking creatures harder to kill with combat and direct damage. Vinny, that's shit. It's probably the worst card that we've revealed so far, not counting the sideboard ones. Celestial Prism, 3 mana artifact. You can pay 2 mana to get 1 mana of any color. So this is a poor man's mana fixer. You're unfortunately losing out on an extra mana to filter for the color that you need. It also doesn't help that it costs 3 to cast, so if you're starving for land, Celestial Prism is still a expensive reward for trying to get the mana filtration that you need. I probably would only see it used back in the day if the deck was 3 or more colors. Another turd. Yes, indeed, I agree. Now this card is pretty infamous. Channel. For 2 green, until the end of the turn, you may add colorless mana to your mana pool at the cost of 1 life each. These additions are played at the speed of an interrupt, which means you can use it when you're using it. They can't interrupt how you're using it. Effects that prevent that damage may not be used to counter this loss of life. So the card by itself doesn't do anything other than you pay X life, add X mana to your mana pool. Remember Brain Geyser? Well, let's just say we have 19, or let's just say we have 20 life. We can use Brain Geyser and draw 16 cards, or if our opponent has 16 cards left, we can pay any amount of life total that we have left to cause them to draw out. Later on, we'll see Fireball, which is the even more direct way to kill your opponent and their creatures. It's 1 red and does X damage to target creatures. So, the most popular combination back in the day was to cast Channel and then Fireball. You would also just have to make sure you didn't kill yourself by paying too much life via the channel. Definitely an infamous card. There's even a website called Channel Fireball, which has their hand in competitive Magic play as well as Magic's tournament strategy, and they, I think, sell cards too. Next up, Chaos Lace. For 1 red. Not sure what's going on in the artwork here. There's just multiple prisms of colors of some sort of, I assume it's lace. Reminds me of a tablecloth that my mom had. Change the color of 1 card being cast or already in play to red. The cost to cast, tap, or maintain or use the ability of the target card remains entirely unchanged. So all you're doing is you're changing the card to red. Doesn't really do anything on its own, but if you had Blue Elemental Blast, no matter what your opponent was playing, you use Chaos Lace on it, and then after using Chaos Lace, the card is now red, you can destroy it with Blue Elemental Blast. Or this was a way around protection. If your opponent played a black creature and your creature had protection from white, you could use Chaos Lace to turn their black creature to a white creature, and therefore your creature would now be protected. Since it was an interrupt, you could do it at instant speed, so I kind of wish they made more cards of this today. I know in future sets they did make cards that change colors of the target, but not at instant speed. Here's an infamous card, Chaos Orb. 2 mana, artifact. You pay 1, you literally flip the card onto the playing area from a height of at least 1 foot. Chaos Orb must turn completely over at least once or is sacrificed with no effect. When Chaos Orb lands, any cards in play that it touches are destroyed, including the orb itself. So this card had no real strategy by itself. This was based on you literally using the card physically to flip it onto the table, and you would hope that it would land on what your opponent wanted. This card is very gimmicky, if not, it was so gimmicky that Magic would later on make a series of gimmicky sets called Unglued and Unhinged. And one of the unglued cards, Vinny just mentioned it, Chaos Confetti, was you would literally rip the card up and you would drop the pieces from at least a foot, and whatever the pieces touched, I think, had to be sacrificed. Obviously, the game would get too ridiculous, and there was probably plenty of rules discrepancies with Chaos Orb as far as how high the opponent would play, or but these are cards. These cards could easily get blown off the table, so dropping a card from a height, that card would probably half the time hit the floor. And I don't think they had card sleeves back then either, so nobody wants to see their cards get ruined. So yeah, Chaos Orb definitely not something Magic pursued in the future, other than the joke gimmicky sets. But even after that, they stopped that whole we're using the cards as a physical aspect entirely. They just stuck to the game itself. Circle of Protection Black. The Circle of Protection Black was one of the 2 cards that was missing from the Alpha set. The Circles of Protections were very powerful cards. I remember having them back in the day. It's an enchantment, so it stays out on the battlefield unless your opponent destroys it. So anytime a black source would deal damage to you, you can pay just 1 mana of any color, or colorless, just 1 colorless. It would prevent all damage that 1 black source did to you. So if your opponent attacked you with 3 black creatures, no matter what their power was, you just pay 3 mana, and you don't take any damage from them. Very overpowered cards back in the day. I think if you were playing black or red and your opponent was playing white, I think it was always going to be an uphill battle, because once the Circles of Protection hit the battlefield, it was probably game over. Black and red have no way of destroying enchantments. To this day, the only way they can, black can do it like target player sacrifices an enchantment, or they can force the opponent to discard it in their hand. Red can't really destroy any enchantments unless they do some sort of like red elemental blast, but they can only destroy blue enchantments. So this definitely was a powerful card for white. And white had a version of each that had a circle protection from each color, including artifacts. And later on in the future, they would make Story Circle, which was a custom circle of protection. It would be able to, yeah, it was called Story Circle. Red has Bombardment. What does that do? I don't think I'm familiar with that card, Vinny. I know Goblin Bombardment. Next up, Circle of Protection Blue. Looks like we have a white wizard. She's got a blue cape on, so she looks like she's versatile in blue spells, surrounded by stones. She looks like she's in the dark woods. I don't see how really like it is about blue. But like I said, they had a circle protection for everything. Circle protection green. I think they should have stuck with like sigils. They should have done a blue sigil instead of this artwork. Circle protection red. Definitely annoying for red players. And they even had it for their if you were up against another white deck, circle protection white. White and green are the best to destroy enchantments, but it wasn't often that a color had a good defense against itself. Circle protection artifacts would come in a later set, and Story Circle would come much later, years later. Here we have Clockwork Beast. This thing looks like it jumped out of a children's book, and it is ugly. For 6 mana, it's a 0/4, but it comes into play with 7 attack plus 1 counters on it. After it attacks or blocks, you sacrifice a counter. During the untap step, the controller may buy back any sacrifice counters for 1 mana per counter. If they do not untap the Clockwork Beast. Not really a good card at all. I didn't think so, Vinny. No problem. Oh, I know of one card though that could the owner of I don't know the exact wording on it, but maybe the owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library. I think that's a way to temporarily get rid of enchantments. Moving on, we're on Clone. Clone is an iconic card because it would have several incarnations in the future. For 4 mana, when you cast Clone, you choose another creature on the battlefield, and Clone becomes a literal copy of the card. If there are no other creatures in play, Clone cannot be cast. They would definitely make other variations of clones in the future. Oh yeah, I forgot about that black card, Vinny. And then you lose life equal to the casting cost. Yep. Alright, so black can nowadays at the cost of life, which makes sense because black has a sacrificial motif to it. Theme. Alright, Birds of Paradise is still my favorite from the set. Cockatrice. 5 mana, 2/4 flying. Any non-wall creatures blocking Cockatrice are destroyed, as are any creatures blocked by the Cockatrice. Creatures destroyed in this way still deal their damage before they die. Yes, Chaos Warp. I got you now, Benny. I did have a deck with Cockatrice in it, but I also had Thicket Basilisk. I don't remember if Thicket Basilisk is from the set or if it's from Legends. But the problem with Cockatrice is because it had flying, a lot of creatures couldn't block it. And it was rare, like I said, it's rare for a green creature to have flying. But still, the ability to destroy any creatures in combat for it. Yeah, even if Cockatrice has Lure, the non-flying creatures still couldn't block it. So I would put Lure on Thicket Basilisk, and then they would have to block. Everything would block and then die. Then I would give the Basilisk Regeneration. Oh, the days of early seventh inning stretch. The Cockatrice, I think, is a cool concept. It's based off of a mythological creature, chicken snake that can turn you to stone, essentially. And that's what it does. Any creatures in combat, it'll automatically kill at the end of combat. It's just not a good card overall, though. Too costly, too little offense, and the fact that it has flying means it can't really be blocked by half the creatures in the game at the time. I like the artwork on it, though. It's still cool. Consecrate land. For 1 white, you put it on a land. All enchantments on target land are destroyed. The land cannot be destroyed or further enchanted until this enchantment has been destroyed. So this pretty much protects a land from being affected by your opponent. I could see this was a sideboard card against Armageddon strategies, but saving just one of your land can still cripple you, but it's better than having nothing. Conservator. This looks like something straight out of Ixalan. For 4 mana, you cast it. Then for 3 mana, you prevent the loss of up to 2 life. So if you had mana to spend, you could prevent the damage done to you 2 at a time. Contract from below. I, the undersigned, do hereby agree to all stipulations as discussed above. Signed, and there's the little demon claw. So for 1 black, discard your current hand and draw 8 new cards, adding the first card drawn to your ante. Remove this card from your deck before playing if you are not playing for ante. So ante was an optional aspect of Magic the Gathering upon its release. Playing for ante would be literally betting a card, and the winner of the game would take the betting card from the loser. There were cards. This isn't the only one that actually had ante in like the rules and such. But again, it was optional. If you didn't want to play for ante, you had to voice that, and then any cards that were ante related, like Contract from Below, had to be removed beforehand. It ended up being too. It was not a popular stipulation, and they eventually retired it after the second or third set, which is good because Magic's a fun game, and I don't want to lose cards that I worked hard to get or pay for. I'm not a betting man. If 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 the cost is if I should say if the loss will hurt, I'm not gonna take that bet. But it's good card draw. Other than that, control magic. For 4 mana, you put an enchantment on a creature, and you gain control of that creature. I think you control enchanted creature until the enchantment leaves play. You cannot tap target creature this turn, but if it was already tapped, it stays tapped until your next untap step. If destroyed, target creature is put into its owner's graveyard. Okay, so you steal a creature, then if the enchantment's destroyed, the creature dies. Pretty good for blue. Blue has a lot of temporary gain control of target creature spells, or just you control them for the rest of the game unless otherwise stated on the card. So this was the first version of that. Conversion. I remember this card back in the day. It was in my first white deck, and it definitely killed red decks. If they were all red, they might as well just concede. So for 2 white and 2 colorless, it's an enchantment, so it stays out on the battlefield. All mountains are considered plains while conversion is in play. You have to pay 2 white mana during your upkeep to keep conversion on the battlefield. If the opponent, if all their mountains were plains, they couldn't cast any of their red spells. So this was a killer for White's answer against Red. Now Red had their own answer against White as well. I think it was called Brushfire. Later on in the set. Copper Tablet, 2 mana Copper Tablet does 1 damage to each player during their upkeep. So looks like it came from Egypt or something. I did not know this card existed. So the fact that it does 1 damage to each player during their upkeep. So your opponent will take the first damage because after playing this, they'll take the first damage. Then when it gets back to you, then you'll take the damage. Interesting card. Hits both players. If you have like a circle protection effect or Urza's armor, which reduces all damage dealt to you by 1, you would end up being immune to its damage. Did not know this card existed. Pretty cool. Copy Artifact. Select any artifact in play. This enchantment acts as a exact copy of the artifact. The copy remains even if the original artifact is destroyed. That's cool. It's pretty straightforward. Counterspell. Very infamous, probably Blue's most powerful card at the time. For 2 blue mana, any spell that your opponents cast, countering it automatically puts it in the graveyard. So they could be casting a dragon. If you had 2 blue mana, countered. If they could cast Black Lotus, if you had 2 blue mana, countered. The only thing they can't counter is lands, because lands are not considered spells. In the future, Magic would make cards that could not be countered at all, and they would eventually make counter spells cost at least 1 mana more, making it harder for blue decks to be able to lock their opponent down. But there are enough counterspell cards in the game to still lock another player down temporarily. Blue's most important weapon, counterspells. Crawworm. Love, love, love the artwork on this card. When I first started playing Magic, worms were one of my favorite creature types. In addition to dragons, pretty much worms were just wingless, legless dragons, giant serpents. Snakes are my favorite animals, so I'm gonna blow them up all the time. And it's a large creature, 6 mana for a 6/4. Doesn't have any other abilities. Creatures with no abilities are known by the community as vanilla creatures. They are great for if you're starting the game. It gives you a good idea of like the basics of combat with power and toughness. We'll go ahead and read the flavor text. The most terrifying thing about the Crawworm is probably the horrible crashing sounds it makes as it speeds through the forest. This noise is so loud it echoes through the trees and seems to come from all directions at once. Crawworm, even though the card is not that good, I like Crawworm better than Birds of Paradise. The artwork and the flavor text does it for me. I had Crawworm in my first green deck, and he stayed in there for a long time before I, quote, got good at the game. Creature Bond. If enchanted creature is destroyed, Creature Bond does an amount of damage equal to the creature's toughness to the creature's controller. So if they have a big creature or a wall out, you could punish them for if their creature dies, the opponent takes damage equal to its toughness. Back in the day, blue did have a lot of unique ways to deal direct damage to the opponent. Nowadays, blue doesn't really have that capability anymore, but this was one of those interesting ways. I have one copy of the card, but it's no longer available. Alright, here's a card that created controversy to the point where Magic ended up like blacklisting it. This card does not meet Magic community standards. It may perpetuate racism, contain harmful stereotypes, or depict a sensitive real world event. We're going to find out what it is. Crusade. All white creatures gain +1/+1. So the Crusades were definitely a real thing, and a lot of people did lose their lives in the pursuit of the Templars and their holy mission, so to speak. And the fact that it says all white creatures does not really help to its infamy. But there are worse cards in Magic that have been blacklisted that are almost blatantly show scenes of blatant racism or things that people could be offended by. But this is the polar opposite to Bad Moon. Bad Moon gave all black creatures +1/+1. Crusade gives the same to all white creatures. Crystal Rod, for 1 colorless mana, every time you pay 1 colorless, any blue spell cast by any player grants you 1 life. Cursed Land, 4 mana. Cursed Land does 1 damage to target land's controller during their upkeep. I love the artwork. This artwork is so good it almost looks like a real photograph. I did have 4 copies of this. I did have a black deck back in the day that all I did was play a bunch of cards. I would enchant your entire battlefield. I'd put it on your creatures, I put it on your lands, I put it on your artifacts. Each one dealt 1 damage to you each turn, to the point where you would just keep getting damage every turn until you died, or unless you were fast enough to kill me. Cyclopean Tomb. I don't think I've ever seen this card before. For 4 mana, artifact. You can pay to turn any target non-swamp land into a swamp. Mark the changed land with tokens. If Cyclopean Tomb is destroyed, remove 1 token of your choice each upkeep, returning that land to its original nature. So I guess for every 2 mana you pay, you make a swamp, or you make a land into a swamp if it's not already a swamp. Then if the tomb leaves the battlefield, each turn they get their land back. Dark Pact, 3 black mana. Without looking at it first, swap the top card of your library with either the card of the ante. The swap is permanent. You must have a card in your library. If you cast a spell, remove this card from your deck before playing for ante. Like I said, it just pretty much swapped the card that was for ante. Dark Ritual, one of Black's powerful cards back in the day. It was like a poor man's Black Lotus. It wasn't free to cast, but only cost 1 black, and then after using it, you would have 3 black to your mana pool, giving Black the ability to speed out their cards. Or you could use the 3 black for a colorless mana if you had more colors available to you. Common use back in the day was turn 1 Swamp, Dark Ritual, Hypnotic Spectre, and we'll see Hypnotic Spectre shortly. Death Grip for 2 black. I like the artwork on the card. It's like on a Heart of Life. Pay 2 black. Destroy green spell as it's being cast. So counter target green spell. This definitely was a black card to hose green decks. Death Lace. It's a snake around a skull. Change the color of one card being played to black. So it's just like the Chaos Lace, but for black. Death Ward. For 1 white, regenerate target creature. So when you regenerate a creature, if it would die in that instance, it pretty much, that death is canceled and it becomes tapped. It like gives the creature an extra life, so to speak. Regeneration would appear over the years until eventually Wizards would retire that ability. And they would, I think, substitute it for target creature becomes indestructible until end of turn. Demonic Attorney. This card art looks funny. 2 black and 1 sorcery. If an opponent doesn't concede the game immediately, each player must ante an additional card from the top of their library. Remove this card from your deck before playing for ante if you're not playing for ante. So if you didn't want to, if you did not want to lose the top card of your library without you knowing, you would concede the game. I could definitely see why ante was quickly canceled or retired. It probably made the game not fun. And thankfully it was optional. Demonic Hordes. This is a little nightmare fuel artwork. 6 mana, pretty costly for black. 5/5 demons, they at least have a health, power, and toughness. You can tap them to destroy 1 land. If you pay 3 black during your, or you have to pay 3 black during your upkeep, or the hordes become tapped, and one of your lands is destroyed. So you playing this card, you had to make sure that you pretty much kept them fed by playing 3 black mana each turn. Created to destroy, I assume this is supposed to be Dominaria. Created to destroy Dominaria, demons can sometimes be bent to a more focused purpose. Demonic Tutor. This card, definitely infamous. So you just pay 2 mana, you can search your deck for any card you want and put it into your hand. There'd be several incarnations of tutor cards in Magic's history, or I should say in Magic's future, but this was the first tutor card. There was literally no drawback for this, making it the most powerful tutor in the game. Dingus Egg. I had this just like in the with the land destruction deck. 4 mana. Whenever anyone loses a land, Egg does 2 damage to that player for each land they lost. So if the opponent had like 10 land out and I cast Armageddon, they would take 20 damage because each land that dies gets the opponent took 2 damage. What a dingus is, I'm not sure, but it does sound funny. Will we ever know what hatches from the egg, if anything even does hatch? Why land destruction is related to it? Who knows? We still don't know yet. If you guys know, let me know. Disenchant. For 2 mana, destroy target enchantment or artifact. This card would definitely still be in Magic's future, and it is to this day. Disintegrate. I love the artwork on this card. For 1 red and X, you get to deal X damage to any one target. If the target is killed, it cannot be regenerated and is removed from the game. So the creature would not be able to be brought back from the graveyard, and it could not regenerate at any point. Like I said, the artwork is amazing. It reminds me of Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Do I like it better than Crawworm? Almost. I like it better than Birds of Paradise, but Crawworm is still going to be number 1. Great card, though, for what it does today. Disrupting Scepter. For 3 mana, you can pay 3. The opponent must discard 1 card of their choice. It can only be used on your turn. Pretty straightforward for discard strategies. Dragon Whelp. It's pretty much a baby dragon. Magic's version of baby dragon. 4 mana, 2/3 flying. Red didn't really have a lot of flying creatures as well. They mainly would have dragons and phoenixes. You can pay 1 red to give the dragon +1 attack until end of turn, +1 power. If more than 3 red was spent in any way, you would have to sacrifice the baby dragon at the end of the turn. Oh, to be a dragon of silkworm size or immense. Poem from Mariana Moore. Oh, to be a dragon. Drain Life. This card would end up becoming popular in tournaments in the future. So you would have to cast it, you pay a black and a colorless. Afterwards, for each black that you pay, you drain 1 life, you do 1 damage to any target, and then you gain that much life. So you could kill the opponent with this. If you had a lot of access to mana, all the mana extra that you pay to drain life, you would use on the opponent, and then you would gain that much life. If you needed to kill a creature with it, that was an option too. However, there was a drawback to that. You cannot drain more life from a creature. You cannot drain life from a creature any more than that creature's toughness. So most of the time, people used it on the opponent. I guess if you absolutely needed to kill the creature to either gain life or prevent it from killing you, that was still an option. You just didn't get the most life that you could out of it. Drain power. 2 blue, tap all opponents' lands, taking all their mana and emptying their mana pool. You cannot tap fewer than all of your opponent's lands. So you can only use this on your turn, but it pretty much stopped them from using any. If they had any instance to use on their turn, they would have had to use it then and there. Otherwise, it pretty much locks them down, and they won't be able to like counter your spells or anything for that turn. Next up, Drudge Skeletons. Thanks, Minnie. I had to update my chat. The last thing I saw you say was "were," so I gotta go. Flying Chicken Snake, Nostalgia. You're going to be putting it in your mono green deck commander. They made a cycle of artifact dual lands with Indestructible. Imagine anteing up your Lotus, Conversion, Justice Karma, the good old days, Flashfire. That would be good with Parallax Haze, that artwork classic. Took him forever to print a Wormlord. Thanks for the compliment, Vinny. A Dingus is a Chungus's younger brother. Back to the Drudge Skeletons. I love the artwork. It reminds me of one of my favorite movies, Army of Darkness. For 1/1, you can pay a black to regenerate the skeletons. So every time they would die, you just pay a black, and they would just stay on the battlefield. Hard to kill unless they got hit with like Disintegrate, or if they had to be sacrificed for any reasons. Bones scattered around us, joined to form misshapen bodies. We struck at them repeatedly. They fell, but soon formed again with the same mocking look on their faceless skulls. I am going to say I do like Drudge Skeletons better than Crawworm. Drudge Skeletons have helped me in the past when I started playing Magic as a blocker, because they would just keep blocking and regenerate, keep blocking and regenerate. And I love the artwork. Skeletons are cool. So I'm going to vote them as my current favorite from the set. Dwarven Demolition Team. This looks funny. This reminds me of the Lost Vikings. There's got Eric. This is probably Olaf's Balrog, even though Balrog's supposed to be blonde. 3 mana, 1/1. You tap them to destroy a wall. Foolishly, Najib retreated to his castle at Elabar. The next morning he was dead. In just one night, the dwarven forces had reduced the mighty walls to mere rubble. So this was good against walls, if walls were a strategy back in the day. Speaking of dwarves, we got Dwarven Warriors, 3 mana, 1/1. You can tap them to make a creature power 2 or less unblockable until any turn. Other cards that may be used to increase the target creature's power beyond 2 Other cards may be used. Okay, so you make a creature with power 2 or less unblockable, then you'll be able to increase the power afterward. I've seen this card before, but I've never seen it used. Earthbind. This artwork is funny. I don't even know. I'm surprised Magic hasn't blacklisted this card because it looks like bondage. But this fairy is definitely, I mean, the earth is literally wrapped around her neck and has her thighs and waist and hands. I'm not going to go into that further. Let's just say what the card does. You put it on a flying creature. Earthbind does 2 damage to target flying creature, and then it loses flying. So if it's a little fairy, like in the card, it'll probably just outright kill it. But if it's like a dragon, it could cause the dragon to not have flying anymore. Interesting card for red. Earth Elemental, 5 mana, 4/5, vanilla creature. Oh, it was criticized? Earth elementals have the eternal strength of stone and the endurance of mountains. Primordially connected to the land they inhabit, they take a long-term view of things, scorning the impetuous haste of short-lived mortal creatures. If I'm paying 5 mana with a creature that doesn't do anything, I at least want the same for power. He at least has 5 toughness, but I don't think I'd ever run Earth Elemental in any deck. Earthquake. This was a popular card back in the day. 1 red and X, you deal X damage to each player and each creature without flying. This deck would end up causing draws if you did enough damage. If you were at 1 life and your opponent was at 9 and you cast this for 9 mana, you would force the game into a draw because both players would die to Earthquake. It was a good defense against strategies with like goblins or knights. If they used creatures that were based on the ground, Earthquake was a good board wipe for them. Elvish Archers, 2 mana, 2/1 elves with first strike. Green doesn't have a lot of creatures with first strike anymore. Back in the day, they had a couple, but that ability seems to have been faded out for the color green. I tell you, there were so many arrows flying about, you couldn't hardly see the sun. So I say to the young Angus, well, at least now we're fighting in the shade. Whoa, looks like 300 stole this quote from Magic the Gathering. Unless Magic the Gathering stole this from another story. Probably something from like Arabian Nights or something. Pretty good cards though back in the day. I'm actually surprised Elvish Archers haven't been reprinted. Elves have been a popular staple in green decks in Magic's history. It's not overpowered if well, maybe, I don't know, because there are so many cards that gives all elves +1/+1. The first strike I guess might make it OP, but it dies to anything. It's got 1 toughness on its own, so any sorcery or instant spell could kill it. I know it was reprinted at one point, but not like in the last 10 years. At least I don't think it was, unless it was put in a commander deck. Evil Presence. For 1 black, target land is now a swamp. Cool artwork. Other than that, it does the whole where you try to lock your opponent out of casting their spells. False Orders. Never seen this card before. For 1 red instant, you decide whether and how 1 defending creature blocks. Though you can't make a choice that the creature couldn't legally make. Only play after the blocker's step, but before damage is dealt. So I guess you choose just how the creature blocks. That's it, really. Farmstead. Never seen this card either. The artwork's pretty cool. 3 white mana you put on a land. Enchanted Land's controller gains 1 life each upkeep that they spend 2 white. That land still generates mana as usual. Oh, so it's just an expensive way to gain 1 life a turn. We're at 80 out of 302 cards. Fast Bond, 1 green enchantment. You may play as many lands onto the battlefield as you want. Fast Bond deals 1 damage to you for every land you cast beyond the first in a single turn. I think I've heard of Fast Bond, but this is my first time actually seeing the card. Definitely pretty overpowered to be able to drop all your land on the first turn that you cast this. Even if you take damage for each land you cast, that 1 damage per land I don't think is going to set you back too far. You'll have such a good lead on your opponent depending on what you play. Great card. Fear. I remember this artwork. For 2 black, you put it on a creature. That creature cannot be blocked by any other creatures other than other black or artifact creatures. Feedback. 3 mana. You put it on a... It's an enchantment that goes on another enchantment. Feedback does 1 damage to the controller enchanted enchantment during that player's upkeep. Here's Fireball. Isn't this artwork sick too? Just like Disintegrate, but it has an additional ability. You can choose to target, you can divide the damage among multiple targets, but you have to pay 1 extra mana for each target beyond the first. But it was a good win condition for red, nonetheless. Disintegrate and Fireball. Fire Breathing. For 1 red mate, you put it on a creature. They get 1 red. They get +1 attack for each red that you pay. Now, the card is supposed to reach until end of turn, but some of them did not have the end of turn text, but it's supposed to stay until end of turn. I had a deck that ran Bloodshot Cyclops. Bloodshot Cyclops was a 4/4 giant that you could tap it, sacrifice a creature, it does damage equal to its attack, equal to target creature or player. So I would just pump a lot of mana into Fire Breathing, attack with the creature, and then sacrifice it afterwards to do major damage. Fire Elemental. The artwork's pretty hot, no pun intended. This is the opposite of Earth Elemental. Instead of being 5 mana for 4/5, it's 5 mana for 5/4. I'd rather play Fire Elemental than Earth Elemental because I like the 5 attack more than I like the 5 toughness. Especially in red when red's supposed to be more aggressive. Fire Elementals are ruthless infernos, annihilating and consuming their foes in frenzied holocaust. Cracking and blazing, they sear swift, terrible paths, leaving the land charred and scorched in their wake. Great artwork. I like the card, even though it's a vanilla creature, just like Crawlworms. Flash Fires. All planes in play are destroyed. So where white had the whole conversion card, Flash Fires just straight up burns all planes in play. Could essentially lock a white player out of playing the game once it reaches that mana. Smoking. Flight. Enchanted creature gains flying for 1 blue. Not bad for its time. Fog. This was a popular card, especially in group games. For 1 green mana, you can cast Fog at any turn. Creatures deal no damage this turn. Creatures deal no combat damage this turn. So if they attack you with 100 creatures, you play 1 green and play Fog. You don't take any damage for that turn. Force Field. Cost 3. You can pay 1 colorless. If you pay 1 colorless, you only lose 1 life to an unblocked creature. So if you get attacked with a creature with 10 attack, having Force Field out, you pay 1. You only lose 1 life from that creature instead of taking the full 10. I never knew this card existed. It's pretty cool. Force of Nature. This card is literally Swamp Thing. That's what I think what it's based after. I've seen people use this card before. It costs 1, 2, 3, 4 green and 2, so 6. It's an 8/8. That's good. 6 mana 8/8. Not bad. It has Trample. That's even better. However, you must pay 4 green during your upkeep, or Force of Nature does 8 damage to you. You can still attack with it if you failed its upkeep cost. But if you're able to cast this, then you should be able to afford this comfortably. Green's not bad with getting a lot of mana. So it's definitely a good green creature back in the day. Here's a basic forest. Classic old school art from Christopher Rush. Then here's another one. This forest I like better. Lots of flora in it. There's a little path. I almost picture myself hiking here. And then this forest I had, because I remember there's a little creature in this tree. So I thought that was cool. Fork. Any sorcerer instant spell just cast is copied. Treat Fork as an exact copy of the spell, except that Fork stays red. Copy the original, and you may have different targets. So if the opponent uses a lightning bolt on you, you can use Fork, and then you get a lightning bolt yourself. Same if they use a fireball on you, you can use Fork to copy the fireball, and your spell will happen first. Frozen Shade. I do remember this artwork as well. This is something that I think should have put in Ice Age, but nonetheless, it starts off as a 0/1, very weak. However, when you pay 1 black, it gets +1/+1. This also should say until end of turn, but that text wasn't printed and would later be fixed in the Unlimited set when the cards went white bordered temporarily. There are some qualities, some incorporate things, that have a double life, which thus is made, a type of twin entity which springs from matter and light, evinced in solid and shade. From the Edgar Allan Poe short story, Silence. Fungasaur. I remember this card. 4 mana, 2/2. Each time Fungasaur is dealt damage, put a +1/+1 counter on it if it survives the damage. Rather than sheltering her young, the female Fungasaur often injures her own offspring, thereby ensuring their rapid growth. Starts out small, but if it can survive the damage that it takes, it could eventually turn into a powerhouse. I've never used the card, but I do own 1 copy. Gaia's Liege. Here's another 6 mana green creature. Star. What does that mean? It's usually X. When blocking, Gaia's Liege has power and toughness equal to the number of forests you have. When it's attacking, they're equal to the number of forests your opponent has. You can tap it on any turn to have 1 land, to turn 1 land into a forest until Gaia's Liege leaves play. You mark the changed lands with a counter, and you remove each counter when Gaia's Liege leaves play. So I see that originally Magic had it to where you could manipulate your opponent's land. Almost every color had that ability to do so. This guy also reminds me of Saruman from Lord of the Rings with antlers. Gauntlet of Might. Can't even tell that's a gauntlet. Oh my. Oh, I see now. So I don't think there's actually a hand in it. That's why it looks so weird. But here's where the thumb would be. For 4 mana, all red creatures gain +1/+1, and all mountains provide an extra red mana when tapped. I did not know this card existed, but I don't think I would use it. Might be good in like goblins, but it still costs 4 mana, so that's a bit costly. Giant Growth, the original artwork. This card would be reprinted many times. For 1 green, target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn. Giant Growth was part of a cycle. Each color had a powerful instant that cost 1 mana of its corresponding color. Blue's version was the most powerful. It was Ancestral Recall. Green gets Giant Growth. Red gets Lightning Bolt. White gets Healing Salve. And I don't remember what black gets. Oh, Dark Ritual. Duh. That's Black's version, Dark Ritual. They made a green version of the Urborg land that would work with that liege. What's the Urborg land? Giant Spider, the first spider in Magic the Gathering. Can block creatures with flying, and it would eventually become the keyword reach. And this spider is probably the most reprinted spider in Magic the Gathering. Coming back every 5 years. While it possesses potent venom, the giant spider often chooses not to paralyze its victims. Perhaps the creature enjoys the gentle rocking motion caused by its captive struggles to escape its web. It's definitely a big spider to be able to climb and build this web over these castle parapets. Drudge skeletons or giant spider. I do like spiders a lot. They're like my third favorite animal. The artwork is good, but I think I'd use Drudge Skeletons more, so Drudge Skeletons are still gonna get the vote. Oh yeah, okay, Urborg turns all lands into swamps. That one turns all lands into forests. I got you now, Vinny. Glasses of Urza. This is the first card that mentions Urza. Urza would be a sort of hero that turns into a tragic villain as the Magic sets go on. But for one colorless, when this card comes out, you could look at your opponent's hand. Gloom, 3 mana. This person's depressed. White spells cost 3 more mana to cast. Ooh, I didn't know this part. Circles of Protection cost 3 more mana to use. That was a good counter to that, then. I had no idea Gloom did that. Okay, so that got changed later on to activated abilities of white enchantments cost 3 more to activate. I had no idea Gloom did that. I knew Gloom existed, but I didn't know about that second part. Here's an iconic red card from back in the day. Goblin Balloon Brigade. 1/1 goblins. You can pay 1 red to give them flying until end of turn. The controller may not choose to make goblins fly after they have been blocked. Okay, so they just get flying until end of turn. From up here, we can drop rocks and arrows and more rocks. Yeah, boss, but how do we get down? Goblin King, the first Goblin Lord of Magic, and pretty much a win condition for Goblin decks. Goblins in play gain Mountain Walk and +1/+1/+1. Goblins are cheap, fast, aggressive creatures, and any card to boost them all just makes them twice as deadly. And if you have a Goblin deck, you definitely need some sort of Goblin King. There are plenty of other creature lords, especially for goblins in Magic's future, and you will see them as I make more videos. Granite Gargoyle. This artwork is pretty cool. Christopher Rush is a great artist, especially for this time of Magic. So for 3 mana, it's a 2/2 flying. It has the opposite of fire breathing. Instead of pumping its power up, its attack, it pumps its toughness up. While most overworlders fortunately don't realize this, gargoyles can be most delicious, providing you have the appropriate tools to carve them. Brought to you by the Underworld Cookbook by Asmorano. I cannot even say that. Asmorano Mardikaistanagulakar? God, I never knew this flavor text or this card existed. It's a cool looking card though. If I had used it, it would probably be my favorite, but I've never used it. I'm still sticking with my skeletons. Gray Ogre, 3 mana, 2/2. This looks more like a giant than it does an ogre. The ogre philosopher Nurdle believed that the purpose of life was to live as high on the food chain as possible. She refused to eat vegetarians and preferred to live entirely on creatures that preyed on sentient beings. 3 mana, 2/2 ogre. Definitely a weak card, doesn't do anything. If I'm paying 3 mana for a creature that doesn't do anything, it needs to be a 3/3. Dude, they made that Kuka card. Yeah, they did. That Gargoyle. Green ward, target creature gains protection from green. Pretty straightforward. Grizzly Bears. This would be an iconic creature in Magic. It would be reprinted and renamed as several different cards in the future. And any creature that was a 2-mana 2/2 would be nicknamed Grizzly Bears. It's not bad, 2 mana for a 2/2. I think that's a fair. Um, I personally think Bears should be more powerful than just having 2 power. I think maybe it should have been 3 mana 3/3 because Bears are generally more. They're powerful. They have some strength, but I just should be thankful they're not 1/1s. Don't try to outrun one of Dominaria's grizzlies. It'll catch you, knock you down, and eat you. Of course, you could always run up a tree. In that case, you'll get a nice view before it knocks the tree down and eats you. Guardian Angel, 1 white and X. Instant prevents X damage from being dealt to any target. Any further damage to the same target this turn can be cancelled by spending 1 mana per point of damage to be cancelled. Interesting. Did not know that card exists. Yeah, I saw the Bear Lord. I think it starts with the letter A too. Here's White's version of Ancestral Recall, even though it's not as powerful. Healing Salve. For 1 white, gain 3 life or prevent 3 damage to a single target. Pretty straightforward. Helm of Chatzuk. For 1 mana, you may give one creature the ability give creature banning until end of turn. This is an ugly ass helmet. I don't think I'd ever wear it. And I'm never using banning. Hill Giant. Look at his nose. 4 mana 3/3 doesn't do anything. For a giant, he's very weak. It should have been 4 mana 4/4. Fortunately, hill giants have large blind spots in which a human can easily hide. Unfortunately, these blind spots are beneath the bottoms of their feet. Hill giant would get reprinted so many times as well, just like grizzly bear and giant spider. Holy Armor. For 1 white, target creature gets +2 toughness. You can pay an extra white to give that creature an extra toughness until end of turn. So you're pretty much beefing the defense of one of your creatures. Holy Strength. Another creature enchantment that would. All creature enchantments later on in the game would be known as auras. This just gives a creature +1 attack, +2 toughness. Keep saying attack. The true word is power. Howl from Beyond. Pay 1 black and X. Target creature gets +X power until end of turn. This was a good win condition if you had a lot of mana and like an unblockable or flying creature that could get through. You could pump all that mana. Channel. You could use Channel with this card to make your Bird of Paradise become a swinging death bird. Granted, the opponent is at lethal life. Howling Mine. This card is still to this day widely used, especially in Commander and multiplayer formats. For 2 mana, the artifact stays on the field. At the beginning of each player's draw step, they draw an additional card. Now, it might sound like it also helps the player because the player gets a card draw bonus, but if you build your deck around like causing discard or the opponent not being able to cast spells, they'll eventually end up having to discard a lot or they'll deck out by not having any more cards in their library. Hurloon Minotaur, 3 mana 2/3, does nothing. Vanilla. He's even white as vanilla here. Minotaurs of the Hurloon Mountains are known for their love of battle. They're also known for their hymns to the dead, sung for friend and foe alike. These hymns can last for days, filling the mountain valleys with low, haunting sounds. Hurricane, the opposite of Earthquake. All players and flying creatures take X damage. Another way you could kill somebody, or all yourself too, if your life total is low enough. Artwork's pretty simple, but it does the job. being in Florida, we do get our fair share of hurricanes and bad weather. The season is upon us. Here's Hypnotic Spectre, as I mentioned with Dark Ritual earlier. 3 mana, 2/2 flying. Doesn't look so imposing on its own. But anytime the Spectre does damage to an opponent, they have to discard a card at random from their hand. Magic does not have a lot of discard card randoms in its future. Hymn to Turok is an exception, and I think there's one other card that costs 2 that causes them to discard a random. But that whole random discard can really mess up your strategy, especially if they play the Spectre on the first turn via Dark Ritual or Black Lotus. This would become an icon to Black for the years to come, but I think he was eventually outdated. Excuse me. All right, we're almost halfway done. We're at 121 out of 302 cards. Ice Storm, 3 mana, destroy any land. So it's the green version of Stone Rain. I did not know that existed. Icy Manipulator. This is an iconic artifact from the game. 4 mana. This would be reprinted almost 15 years later, Mirrodin. But it stays on the field. You pay 1 and you tap it. You can tap any creature, land, or artifact. The ability to shut down one of your opponent's permanents is pretty powerful. It can be used offensively to shut down a blocker, or defensively to shut down an attacker for the turn. Illusionary Mask. It looks goofy. 2 mana, you can pay X. You can summon a creature face down so your opponent doesn't know what it is. I like that text. The X cost can be any amount of mana, even 0. It serves to hide the true casting cost of the creature. As soon as the face down creature takes damage or deals damage, it is then turned face up. So that's like a weird, another weird morph card. Instill Energy. For 1 green, you may untap target creature. That creature may you may untap target creature both during your untap step and 1 additional time during your turn. That creature may also attack the turn it comes into play. So it gives the creature haste, and you can untap them for free once each turn. Good for like Bird of Paradise. You'll be able to get more mana for your buck after the first cost. Invisibility, 2 blue. Enchanted creature can only be blocked by walls. Decent. Ironclaw Orcs, 2 mana, 2/2, just like Grizzly Bears. They cannot be used to block any creature with power more than 1. Generations of genetic Whedon have given rise to the deviously cowardly Ironclaw clan. To say that orcs in general are vicious, depraved, and ignoble does not do justice to the Ironclaw. His face reminds me of Goldar from Power Rangers. 2 mana, 2/2 for reds. Decently aggressive, though. Ironroot Treefolk. 5 mana, 3/5, does nothing. I guess he's more of a blocker. The mating habits of treefolk, particularly the stalwart Ironroot treefolk, are truly absurd. Molasses comes to mind. It's amazing the species can survive at all given such protracted periods of mate selection, conjugation, and gestation. I have never read Ironroot treefolk's flavor text until today, and I had no idea it talked about the mating habits of treefolk. I have seen the artwork many times, and I have ignored the card because it sucks. It might essentially just be a 5 mana for green, having just 3 power, and then no trample or reach or anything like that. Oh yeah, later on, Magic would really cater to tree folks with the Lorwyn set, and then giving green the ability for creatures to deal damage with their toughness instead of their power, like Vinny mentioned in the chat. Iron Star. This is good against red. Anytime a red spell is played, you can pay 1 to gain 1 life. Here's an original island. I think the sky looks amazing. It's like a sunrise. Maybe these are Asian islands or somewhere in the Pacific. Your tree folk turn into commander deck. Here's another island in the middle of the day. This one definitely looks more Caribbean-like. And this one is the same series of islands and during sundown. I think this island's probably my favorite, the sunrise one. Island Sanctuary, 2 mana enchantment. You may decline to draw a card from your library during your draw step. In exchange, until the start of your next turn, only creatures that may attack you are those that have flying or island walk. I didn't know that card existed, but you can stop drawing a card to pretty much put yourself in a bubble, unless the creature has flying or island walk. Did not know that existed. It also stops you from milling out if you have no cards in your deck. Ivory Cup, you can gain 1 white for each spell cast for white. Jade Monolith, 4 mana. For 1 mana, you may take damage done to any creature on yourself instead, but you must take all of it. The source of damage is unchanged. So if you want to save your creature from dying to damage, you can take the damage for it instead with Jade Monolith. I can see that having some decent combos. I just can't think already really of one, but you definitely don't want a creature to die if it's part of a combo. Jade Monolith is an option. Now we have a Jade Statue. It looks like this guy's pooping. For 2 mana, Jade Statue becomes a creature for the duration of combat. Oh, it's a creature, 3/6. Some of the other guys dared me to touch it, but I knew it weren't no ordinary hunk of rock, nor in the wary. 4 mana, 3/6. I can become a creature for 2 mana. I guess it's okay. It's almost as bad as Iron Tree Folk. Jayendai Tome. For 4 mana, you can draw a card. It's pretty decent. I mean, it's not good by today's standards nowadays, but back in the day, card draw for an artifact was good. Here's a card that's got reprinted with several core sets. Juggernaut. 4 mana, 5/3. It must attack each turn if able, and it cannot be blocked by walls. We had taken refuge in a small cave, thinking the entrance was too narrow for it to follow. To our horror, its gigantic head smashed into the mountainside, ripping itself a new entrance. Jump. Target creature gains flying until end of turn. So unlike flight, it just gives the creature flying until end of turn. Pretty basic. Later on, Magic would add additional effects to cards like these. Like maybe nowadays this would say draw a card in addition to giving the creature flying until end of turn. But overall, a weak card. Here's another strong card for white. Karma. 4 mana. For each swamp in play, Karma deals 1 damage to its owner during that player's upkeep. Definitely could be used in combo with Urberg or Borg that we mentioned earlier in the stream that turns all lands into swamps in addition to their type. So I guess this guy did something bad, and now Karma caught up with him with these blood-sucking vines all over his body, draining him. Keldon Warlord, 4 mana, XX. The X's below are the number of your non-wall creatures, including the Warlord itself. Thus, if you have 2 other non-wall creatures, Warlord is 3/3. If one of those creatures is killed during your turn, Warlord immediately becomes 2. So, easier said, Keldon Warlord's power and toughness is equal to the number of creatures you control that are not walls. It's interesting for red. Alright, now we are officially halfway done with this. Cormus spell, 4 mana, treat all swamps in play as 1/1 creatures. They can be enchanted, destroyed, and they can still be tapped for mana or attack. Swamps are still colorless and are not considered black creatures. That's interesting. It animates swamps. I never knew this card existed either. Kudzu, 3 mana, enchant land. When enchanted land is tapped, it is destroyed. If it was the last land in play, Kudzu goes to the graveyard. Otherwise, the player whose land was destroyed places it on a land of his or her choice. Kudzu is a very invasive species, and I guess I can see why they chose to have it become like a chain card. We would see more chain cards in the future. Lance, target enchanted creature gets first strike. Ley Druid, 3 mana, tap the Druid to untap a land. After years of training, the Druid becomes one with nature, drawing power from the land and returning it when needed. Library of Lang, 1 mana. You have no maximum hand size. If a card forces you to discard, you may choose to discard the top card of your library instead. If the discard is random, you may look at the card before discarding. So that's an interesting counter to discard themes. Lich. This looks like an Asian Lich. 4 mana. As Lich enters the battlefield, because I know this is worded weird, so I'm just going to read the read done. As Lich enters the battlefield, you lose life equal to your life total. You do not lose the game for having 0 or less life. If you would gain life, draw that many cards instead. Whenever you're dealt damage, sacrifice that many non-token permanents. If you cannot, you lose the game. If Lich is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you lose the game. So this is definitely a risky card for immortality. If you're already winning the game, you definitely do not want to play this card, but I guess if you're losing, then this is an option to stay alive longer if you can, if you have the cards to sacrifice. Life Force, this is the opposite of Death Grip. Every time a black spell is played, you can play 2 green once this card is out in the field to counter that black spell. Life Lace, it's the green version of Chaos Lace and the other lace card that changes the color to green. Life Tap, enchantment, you gain 1 life each time a forest becomes tapped by your opponent. Blue counter to green, so to speak. Here's the iconic Lightning Bolt, one of the best early burn damages in the game. 1 red, 3 damage to any target. Great card. Vinny, what do you run Life Force in your commander deck? I know I have Life Force and Death Grip. I've used them before. Living Artifact. For 1 green, put a counter on target artifact for each life you lose. During your upkeep, you may trade 1 counter for 1 life, but you can only trade in 1 counter each turn. I need to reread that. Enchant Artifact. Whenever you're dealt damage, put that many Vitality counters on Living Artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may remove a Vitality counter. If you do, you gain 1 life. That's a weird way for Living Artifact. I would think Living Artifact would turn an artifact into a creature. So I think this card should have been renamed. Living Lands. Treat all forests in play as 1/1 creatures. So this is the green version of the Bell, which animates swamps. This animates forests. The artwork is turning these trees and plants into a creature. There's its eyes and mouth and arms. Interesting art. Speaking of interesting art, Living Wall. It's just a random pile of flesh and eyes and teeth. It is a wall, a 0/6, and you can regenerate with it. Although something with teeth, I would assume it would have some sort of like power to it. Some fiendish mage had created a horrifying wall of living flesh patched together from a jumble of still recognizable body parts. As we sought to hew our way through, some unknown power healed the gaping wounds we cut, denying us passage. Cool story. Pods over here love multicolored decks. Black, blue are popular. I know right now I have a commander deck on Arena that uses Adeliz, the Cinderwind, so I play blue-red wizards for commander. Run that in the Arcadis commander deck. Oh yeah, with the walls can attack. Here's our most famous mana dork, Llanowar Elves. 1 green, you can tap them for 1 green. Unlike Birds of Paradise, they cannot produce 1 mana of any color, but they still produce green. They do have minor offense where the Birds of Paradise don't, and they are an elf, so they do get boosted by other elves from Magic. But they're more useful in 1 or 2 colored decks as opposed to Birds of Paradise. You can comfortably run them with almost 5 colors as well. I do like the Llanowar Elves flavor text. Whenever the Llanowar Elves gather the fruits of their forest, they leave 1 plant each type untouched, considering that nature's portion. Well, that's not the flavor text I remember. I have a copy of Llanowar Elves because Llanowar Elves has been reprinted many times, but this artwork has 1 bone broken for every twig broken underfoot, which was called the Llanowar crime for trespassing. Lord of Atlantis, he is the merfolk lord, just like Goblin King is the lord of the goblins. Lord of Atlantis is the lord of merfolk, and he gives all merfolk +1/+1 and island walk. A master of tactics, the Lord of Atlantis makes his people bold in battle merely by arriving to lead them. Creature lords in the future will eventually only affect creatures on your side of the battlefield, as opposed to all creatures in play. Magic would fix that as the years would progress. Here's an iconic black creature, Lord of the Pit. 7 mana, 7/7, but he flies and tramples. However, he does have a drawback. You must sacrifice 1 of your own creatures during your upkeep, or Lord of the Pit does 7 damage to you. You may still attack with Lord of the Pit, even if you failed to sacrifice a creature. My memory thought that he becomes tapped, but I know there are a lot of other creatures that do have like these upkeeps that you must pay. But I always thought he became tapped if you couldn't. Is that a Mandela effect? Vinny, am I experiencing a Mandela effect? I thought Lord of the Pit becomes tapped in addition to the 7 damage if you didn't sacrifice a creature. Breeding Pool. Yeah, Breeding Pool would combo with him. Flying Tram at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature other than Lord of the Pit. If you can't Lord of the Pit, deal 7 damage. What do you want me to scroll to? I know I have 1 as well. I could always look later myself. But I gotta move on. Lure. All creatures able to block enchanted creature do so. The blocking still has to be legal. I used to put this on my basilisks to force my opponent to block everything. Therefore, it would end up killing everything that was blocking. I was looking at the website's reading of the card. Gotcha. Magical Hack. 1 blue. Change the text of any card by replacing the basic land type. For example, you can change Swamp Walk to Planeswalk. So this would be a good card if you are if you're using a card like Destroy All Islands or Destroy All Planes. You can use Magical Hack to change the land type being used. This has a lot of combo potential to any kind of card that has any land in their text that affects a specific land. Mahamoti Jin, iconic blue creature. Um, I think Air Elemental is better just because it only costs 5 and it's a 4/4. This does cost 1 mana more. 6 is pretty costly, but it is a 5/6 flyer, so it does hit hard once you're able to afford it, and it does have a hefty. The toughness does match this, but I'm a fan of if I'm paying big mana for a creature, I at least want its power to be equivalent to its casting cost. Of royal blood among the spirits of the air, the Mahamoti Jin rides on the wings of the winds. As dangerous in the gambling hall as he is in battle, he is a master of trickery and misdirection. Mana Barbs. 4 mana. Whenever a land is tapped, Mana Barbs does 1 damage to that land's controller. This card would be reprinted a few times. Mana Flare. This is a popular card even to this day. This is like a face, and there's lasers coming out of it, like Tyra Banks style. Whenever either player taps a land for mana, that land produces 1 extra mana of its appropriate type. So essentially, lands produce double their mana. This is a very popular card in group games and used to ramp out expensive spells quickly. Mana Short. All opponents' lands are tapped and their mana pools are emptied. One rule that used to be was if somebody tapped land for mana, if they had any mana left over at the end of their turn, they would take damage equal to the excess, which was called mana burn. Magic would eventually retire that rule because it was not friendly for new players, and they wanted to simplify the game wherever they could. Mana Vault, 1 mana. You could tap it to add 3 mana to your mana pool. This Mana Vault does not untap during its untap step. You would have to pay 4 mana to be able to use it again on your turn. If the vault remains tapped during your upkeep, it does 1 damage to you. This artwork looks like it came from either Nightmare on Elm Street or Hellraiser. It almost reminds, because of the chains in the box, I'm getting Hellraiser vibes. How this would give you any mana, because this definitely looks like this should be called Hell Vault instead of Mana Vault. Meekstone. 1 mana. Any creature with power greater than 2 may not be untapped during the controller's untap step. Definitely made players think twice about attacking with their big creatures because they didn't want them to be locked, tapped. Merfolk of the Pearl Trident, 1 mana, 1/1 Merfolk. Most human scholars believe that merfolk are the survivors of the sunken Atlantis. Humans adapted to the water. Merfolk, however, believe that humans sprang forth from merfolk who adapted themselves in order to explore their last frontier. Very weak creature. Even in a merfolk deck, I don't think I would run these because they have no ability whatsoever. And they will be outclassed in the future. Mesa Pegasus, 1/1 flying and banding. Before a woman marries in the village of Circe, she must visit the land of the Mesa Pegasus. Legend has it that if the woman is pure of heart and her love is true, a Mesa Pegasus will appear, blessing her family with long life and good fortune. I do remember running this card. I do like horses, and Pegasus was always a cool creature in mythology, Greek mythology especially. I did use this card, but I never actually used the banding part of it. Mind Twist. X and 1 black. Opponent must discard X cards at random. If the opponent doesn't have enough cards in his hand, their entire hand is discarded. Now this would be crazy being used with Dark Ritual, or I can imagine somebody plays 2 Dark Rituals, and then you have to discard your starting hand of 4 cards randomly. That would suck to play against. Mons Goblin Raiders, these are the equivalent to Merfolk the Pearl Trident. 1/1 Goblin for 1 that does nothing. Intricate dynamics or run-about goblins' affairs are often confused with anarchy. Chaos, however, is the chaos of a thundercloud, and the direction will sporadically and violently appear. Pashalek Mons and his raiders are the thunderhead that leads in the storm. These goblins look awfully like Native American folk to me. Here's Magic's Mountain. I do like these pine trees. Reminds me of forests we have here. This one's more up north and snow-like. I do like the first one better. And this one has a more western vibe to it. I like the third one better than the first one. No, third one's my favorite. And they added the third artwork of these lands. Alpha only had 2 different versions of the basic lands. Beta was introduced the third artwork. Here's one of the first of the Moxes, Mox Emerald, part of the Power 9. It is like a slight part of a Black Lotus. For free, you can add 1 green mana to your mana pool. However, what is different from the Lotus, you don't have to sacrifice it. So you get free green mana for nothing. And that is the reason why the Moxes are part of the Power 9. Here we have the Jet, which does the same thing for black. The Pearl, which does the same thing for white. The Ruby, which does the same for red. And the Sapphire corresponding to blue. I never owned any of the original Moxes. Later on, they would make Mox Diamond, which was almost worked like those Moxes, but I think you had to discard a card from your hand, and whatever the discarded card was the color the Mox could tap for, if I remember correctly. Next up, we have Natural Selection. I've never seen this card. This is a weird eagle-headed tiger man. I don't know if he's holding a peach or a dodgeball or if he's going bowling. I don't know what's going on the art. And he's got a rope. Look at the top 3 cards of any player's library. You may opt to rearrange those cards or shuffle their entire library. That's cool that you could do that to your opponent. And this looks like something that blue should do, not green. Still just a weird artwork for what it does and what the name of the card is. Nether Shadow. I own this guy. They're pretty cool. He has a very Halloween vibe to him. 2 mana, 1/1. It has haste. If Shadow is in the graveyard with any combination of at least 3 creatures above it, you may return it to the battlefield for its normal casting cost. It was just a cool reoccurring creature that could attack right away when it comes out. Having it be a 1/1 means it was just a nuisance, but over time, when your opponent gets closer and closer to 0, another Shadow would just keep coming back. Granted that you had plenty of creatures still in your graveyard above it. Nettling Imp. I like the artwork. It's very comic book style. Quentin Hoover did a lot of that style of artwork. 3 mana, 1/1. You can tap it to force a non-wild creature to attack. If for any reason the target creature cannot attack, it is destroyed at the end of the turn. This could only be used before the combat phase. It cannot be used on a creature that has summoning sickness. Here's an iconic multiplayer card. Navinral's Disc, 4 mana. I thought, oh, you do have to tap. Okay, you pay 1 and tap it, you destroy all. It comes into play tap, but then once you use it, you pay 1, tap it, destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments in play. Does the disc destroy itself? Destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. Yeah, the disc does destroy itself. There were combos used that made the disc indestructible. Therefore, the disc would just destroy everything else on the battlefield except for lands, thus protecting itself, and your opponent couldn't really play any more permanents for the rest of the game unless they were able to remove that artifact from play somehow. The name, I think the name was Larry Niven. I forgot who Larry Niven was, but he was, I think, a staff member of Wizards of the Coast or a Magic tournament player, and the card was named after him, so to speak. Nightmare. Here's another iconic card. 6 mana. The artwork's pretty cool. I'm get Ghost Rider vibes. I can't talk anymore. This also looks like a pissed off Rapidash from Pokemon. Its power and toughness is equal to the number of swamps in play. So if you're running just a straight black deck and you have nothing but swamps in the deck, and you don't cheat them out with Dark Ritual or any Graveyard Revival, 6 mana for a 6/6 with flying is really good for black. And the later the game goes, the more swamps you have out, the more powerful Nightmare gets. Nightmare will see plenty of reprints in a lot of the core starter sets as Magic went on. The Nightmare arises from its lair in the swamps. As the poison land spreads, so does its rage and terrifying strength. Northern Paladin almost looks like Bruce Campbell. He just has a wider head up here. Vinny sent me a picture of Tackle Maggot, which we'll see later. Northern Paladin costs 4 mana, 3/3. You can pay 2 white and tap them to destroy any black permanent in play. It cannot be used to counter a black spell. Look to the north, and there you will find 8 in comfort. So this is a white counter to black. Obsidious Golem? Obsidious? I can't pronounce that. Obsidious? 6 mana, 4/6, doesn't do anything. The footstone is connected to the ankle stone, and the ankle stone is connected to the leg stone. Song of the Artificer. He looks like Torch from Puppet Master. Orcish Artillery. 2 mana, 1/3 orcs. Tap them to do 2 damage to any target and 3 damage to you. If you give them lifelink, you'll get that life back. In a rare display of ingenuity, the orcs invented an incredibly destructive weapon. Most orcish artillerists are those who dared to criticize its effectiveness. Orcish Oriflame, 4 mana. When attacking, all your attacking creatures get +1 to attack. This was used in early Goblin decks too to further improve the Goblin's offense and power. Paralyzed. Looks like the Centaur got paralyzed for 1 black. Enchanted creature does not untap during its untap phase unless its controller pays 4 mana. Tap the creature when it's paralyzed under the battlefield. Tap enchanted creature. That's what it would say nowadays. Hurled Unicorn, 3 mana, 2/2 vanilla creature. Do you know I always thought unicorns were fabulous monsters too? Never saw one alive before. Well, now that we have seen each other, said the unicorn. You'll believe in me, I'll believe in you. From Lewis Carroll. Personal. Was that from Lion Witch of the Wardrobe? Did I get that right? Anyway, Personal Incarnation, 6 mana. We got this wizard here, and then he has an avatar of himself, but he's more like He-Man like. Caster can redirect any or all damage done to Personal Incarnation to himself instead. The source of the damage is not changed. If Personal Incarnation is destroyed, its controller loses half his or her life. Round it up. Let's reread that. The next 1 damage that we dealt to Personal Incarnation this turn is dealt to its controller instead. Only Personal Incarnation's controller may activate this ability. When Personal Incarnation dies, its owner loses half their life rounded up. Awfully risky, 6 mana, 6/6. It doesn't even have trample. It's risky for a big creature. for white. I love this artwork for Pestilence. It's like a zombified kid. I think he has legions or leeches on him. Definitely died and came back from the dead to Pestilence or something. Anyway, Pestilence was an awesome card. Black. Costs 4 mana enchantment. For every black you cast, it does 1 damage to all creatures and players. At the end of any turn, if there are no creatures in play, Pestilence is destroyed. Vinny is sending me pictures of his revised cards. I have the same Hypnotic Specters, Vinny. Or I do have one, I think I have one from Beta. I know I have one black bordered Spectre, but the other 3 are white. This Pestilence will be reprinted again in Urza Saga, and I think one more time as well. Definitely an iconic card in my memory. Phantasmal Forces, 4 mana, 4/1 flyer. Its controller must spend 1 blue during their upkeep to keep them alive, otherwise they must be sacrificed. These beings embody the essence of true heroes long dead. Summoned from the dream realms, they rise to meet their enemies. They give me Valkyrie vibes. Phantasmal Terrain for 2 blue. Target land becomes any basic land type of its owner's choice. Land type is set when cast and may not be further altered by this enchantment. So if you want somebody's swamp to become an island, you just slap Phantasmal Terrain on them. Phantasmal Monster, 4 mana, 3/3 flying. While like a ghastly rapid river through the pale door, a hideous throng rush out forever and laugh but smile no more. Edgar Allan Poe, The Haunted Palace. The artwork is pretty cool. It looks like some sea creature, eel, giant clam thing. Don't know what its whole body looks like, but it's probably like a jellyfish or something. 3/3 flying for 4 isn't that bad. It's pretty basic, but it'll get the job done if it can block most 2/2 flyers and comfortably swing without being blocked. So it's regular. It's not bad, but it's not the best. Pirate Ship, 5 mana, 4/3. Can tap it to do 1 damage to any target. Cannot attack the opponent unless they have an island. Pirate Ship is destroyed if its controller has no islands in play at any time. Plague Rats. I like the artwork here. 3 mana. Plague Rats has power and toughness. Power and toughness equal to the number of Plague Rats in play. If there are 2 Plague Rats in play, each one has power 2. Should you, a rat to madness, tease why even a rat may plague you? From Recantation by Samuel Gorge. I'm trying to make sense of this quote. Should you, a rat to madness, tease why even a rat may plague you? I don't know. I don't know what that means, but I guess it's out of context. Later on, Plague Rats would be overshadowed by a bunch of other rat cards. Plague Rats, unless it's got a rat in, Plague Rats, power touch, a good number of creatures named Plague Rats on the battlefield. Alright, so it's not. There are cards that just care about rats in general that do the same thing. They have power equal to the number of rats on the battlefield, which are better than Plague Rats. Now we're at Plains. This is a cool field. You got the wind blowing the sand over to the right. You see the clouds moving this way. This Plains is more Serengeti-like. And then the third is, this looks more like a Mediterranean field. I guess the second Plains is my favorite from the group. Alright, Vinny, check the Lord of the Pit, and it does not tap. I must be thinking of another creature instead. Probably from like Fallen Empires or something like that. I'm sure we'll find out. Plateau is the dual land for mountain plains. Power Leak, 2 mana, enchant an enchantment. Target enchantment costs 2 extra mana during its controller's upkeep. If the mana cannot be paid, Power Leak does 1 damage to him for each unpaid mana. Another weird way of blue doing direct damage. Power Sink. This is like a counter spell, but for X. Counter target spell unless its caster pays X. If that caster cannot pay, or if that caster, the owner of the spell does not pay, tap all lands from that. I gotta reread this. Counter target spell unless its controller pays X. If that player doesn't, they tap all lands with mana abilities that they control, and they lose all mana in their mana pool. So not only would it counter a spell, but it also stops the rest of their turn because it essentially taps all their the rest of their mana. It's pretty powerful for nowadays standards. We have 101 cards left to look at, so probably 30 more minutes. Power Surge, 2 mana enchantment. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, Power Surge deals X damage to that player, where X is the number of untapped lands they controlled at the beginning of their turn. Zap through this Asian dude. I think he was Asian. Prodigal Sorcerer. This guy would be nicknamed Timmy, I think. I think he was nicknamed Timmy. But he's a 1/1 that you can tap him to do 1 damage to any target. The community would also call these cards pingers, because they would essentially ping for 1 damage. That was one of my first blue decks that I made, was nothing but a bunch of ping cards. Occasionally a member of the Institute of Arcane Study acquires a taste for worldly pleasures. Seldom they have trouble finding employment. Psionic Blast. 3 mana. Psionic Blast does 4 damage to any target, but 2 damage to you. This card would eventually be redone in red and would be called Char. Blue does not have a lot of ways to do direct damage anymore, but it did back in the day. This was a good card for blue. Psychic Venom. I use this card with my Ankh of Mishra deck. You enchant a land. Whenever that land becomes tapped, it does 2 damage to that land's controller. I love Cobras, and this artwork is amazing for it. But Drug Skeletons is still going to be my favorite card from the set so far. Pure Lace changes the text of a permanent to white. Raging River, 2 mana. When you attack, non-flying blocking creatures must be divided as the opponent wishes between left and the right side of the river. You then choose which side of the river to place each attacking creature, and attack creatures can only block by flying creatures or creatures on that same side of the river. So you're essentially dividing the creatures into 2 different piles, and then you decide which pile gets to attack and block. That's cool. I didn't know there was a card that early, because Magic has several cards that deal with separating into 2 piles. So the Raging River was one of the first. Raised Dead. This is cool artwork. For 1 black, you get to return a creature from your graveyard to your hand, essentially resurrecting it from the dead. Here's Red Elemental Blast, as Vinny mentioned earlier, the mirror opposite of Blue Elemental Blast, which naturally counters a blue spell or destroys a blue card in play. Red Ward, target creature gains protection from red. Regeneration, I would put this on my Basilisk to survive all the creatures that blocked it. All you gotta do is pay 1 greed to regenerate the creature that regeneration is on. Regrowth, for a green and a colors, you can return any card from your graveyard to your hand. Definitely powerful because you can even return instants and sorceries with this card. Resurrection, for 4 mana, you can take a creature from your graveyard and put it directly on the battlefield. Reverse damage. 3 mana. All damage you have taken from any source this turn is added to your life total instead. So it literally does what the name of the card is. It reverses the damage, and you gain life from it. Righteousness. Target blocking creature gets +7/+7 until end of turn for only 1 white mana. And I think on the card it's like a Benalish hero. This could definitely turn the tides of battle, even if you have a lowly 1/1 creature and the opponent attacks with like a 6/6. Your 1/1 could block the creature and you could pop Righteousness on it, and then the creatures would kill each other. Your opponent would be sat there looking surprised or pissed off. Rock Hydra. The artwork is primitive, but it still gets the job done. 2 mana and X, put X +1/+1 counter on the Hydra. Each point of damage the Hydra suffers, remove a +1/+1 counter. During your upkeep, you can put a +1/+1 counter on it by paying 3 red. For each 3 red you pay, you add a +1/+1 counter. Magic would have many Hydras in the future. This one is very specific as far as where it mentioned heads, but they changed its ability to be more straightforward. Yep, Vinny, Lord of the Pit never actually made you tap it, so I'm definitely thinking of another demon. Rock of Kerr Ridges, 4 mana, 3/3 flyer. Again, red did not have many flying creatures other than dragons and phoenixes. So this was essentially the phantom monster for red. We encountered a valley topped with immense boulders and eerie rock formations. Suddenly, one of these boulders toppled from its perch and sprouted gargantuan wings, casting a shadow of darkness and sending us fleeing in terror. This definitely looks like something that would be on a medieval coat of arms, a crest, or something pulled straight out of the medieval bestiary. Rod of Ruin. I definitely remember this card from the artwork alone. Cost 4 mana to cast, and all you gotta do is pay 3 mana and tap it to do 1 damage to any target. It's definitely weak for nowadays standards, but it was decent back in the day. Royal Assassin. For 3 mana, 1/1, you can tap it to destroy any tapped creature. Trained in the arts of stealth, the Royal Assassins choose their victims carefully, relying on timing and precision rather than brute force. So if a creature becomes tapped to attack you, you can just tap the assassin to destroy it. Whoa, this is a brutal card. I've never seen this. Sacrifice. This guy's smiling, going to stab this perp guy right in his heart. Destroy one of your creatures, or I guess this is reworded later on as sacrificing. As soon as it costs to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature. Add an amount of black mana equal to your mana pool equal to the sacrifice creature's mana value. It's weird that this card is in the same set as Dark Ritual. So this is definitely, I don't think, worth it in the long run. I mean, you can use Dark Ritual, you can use the Black Lotus and the Moxes. I don't think you would need this to use ever really back in the day. Nowadays, you could probably get away with it somehow, some way, but still, this is probably one of the worst cards, in my opinion, in the set. Semite Healer, 1/1. You can tap it to prevent 1 damage to any target. Healers ultimately acquire the divine gifts of spiritual and physical wholeness. The most devout are also granted the ability to pass physical wholeness onto others. Generic cleric ability. Savannah, the green and white dual land. Pretty African Savannah. This almost looks like a real photo. Rob Alexander did a good job with the landscape. Speaking of African Safari, we got Savannah Lions. 2 mana, or excuse me, 1 mana, 2/1. Pretty aggressive for its cost back in the day. The traditional kings of the jungle command a healthy respect in other climates as well. Relying mainly on their stealth and speed, savanna lions can take a victim by surprise even in the endless flat plains of their homeland. Back in the day, they were a very aggressive creature. There are several other creatures now, especially in white, that have 2 power and 1 toughness. I think there's a soldier, um, knights, different other creature types follow the same record as the line. Scathe zombies, 3 mana 2/2. Just like the Grey Ogre, they don't do anything. Their only benefit, I guess, is they're zombies and they can get boosted from the zombie lord that we'll see in the form of Zombie Master at the end of this list. They groaned, they stirred, they all uprose, nor spoke, nor moved their eyes. It had been strange, even in a dream, to have seen these dead men rise. Samuel Coleridge, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. These zombies, this one looks just goofy, like he's almost smiling. Um, it almost looks like a kid drew these. I mean, I'm not good at painting, so I shouldn't really criticize the art, but these are probably the worst looking zombies I've ever seen any artwork of. Scavenging Ghoul. This one looks more zombie, or actually looks like a crackhead, a Florida man. At the end of each turn, put a counter on the ghoul for each other creature that was destroyed. If ghoul dies, you may use the counter to regenerate it. He's a 2/2 for 4. Scrubland, that's the white-black dual land. Scribe Sprites, 1/1 flying for 1 green. A green flying 1/1 for fairy. So just like Birds of Paradise, but they can actually pack a punch for 1, and they don't tap for mana. The only sound was the gentle clicking of the fairy's wings. Then those intruders who were still standing turned and fled. One thing was certain, they didn't think the scribe were very funny anymore. Sea Serpent. The artwork's primitive, but I like it. It's like a giant eel almost, rising above, going over this boat. It's about to capsize. 6 mana, 5/5. The Sea Serpent cannot attack unless the opponent has an island in play. Serpent is sacrificed if at any time its controller does not control an island. Legend has it that the Serpent used to be bigger, but how could that be? I tried. I had a Sea Serpent deck back in the day where I turned my opponent's lands into islands, granting my serpents able to be attack them. But the serpents are slow and they are mana heavy. But it was still fun to use for kitchen table magic, casual. Sedge Troll, 3 mana 2/2 for 1 black. It can regenerate, and he also gets +1/+1 if its controller has a swamp. The stench in the hovel was overpowering. Something loathsome was cooking. Occasionally something surfaced in the thick paste, but my host would casually push it down before I could make out what it was. It's like Florida version of Shrek. Here's an iconic black creature, Sengir Vampire. The artwork is a bit creepy. I don't know where you would find just veins chilling on the side of the wall, and the Sengir Vampire is like gonna make out with it. But anyway, we got a 5 mana 4/4 flying. Sengir Vampire gets a +1/+1 counter each time a creature went to the graveyard that took damage from the vampire. The Sengir Vampire will become a staple in black decks for years to come and be reprinted a couple times, especially during the core sets. And then further on, vampires became a tribal creature type, and then the Sengir Vampire kind of faded into obscurity. The Sengir Vampire's polar opposite, Serra Angel, 5 mana 4/4 flying. It had vigilance, which it was the keyword made for this creature does not tap when attacking. It was definitely a staple card for white, as white's win condition. Born with wings of light and its sword of faith, this heavenly incarnation embodies both fury and purity. Just like with Sangre Vampire, angels became a staple tribe as well, and Sarah Angel, for the first half of Magic's life, was a symbol, and then it has also faded into history. Shanadid Dryads, 1/1 Forest Walk. Moving without sound, swift figures pass through the branches and undergrowth completely unhindered. One with the trees around them, the Dryads of Shanadid Forest are seen only when they wish to be. She doesn't look like she's in a forest, she's walking around in a desert. Shatter. 2 mana and destroy target artifact. Pretty good with all the there's some great artifacts in this set, so Shatter was definitely a key card to use if you were running red. Speaking of red, here's red's kill condition, Shivan Dragon. And Shivan Dragon will surpass Rudge Skeletons as my favorite card of the set. The POV alone is amazing because this dragon is literally going to stomp us. POV shots in Magic cards I think are great because they kind of put you in the action. I like the colors on the dragon, and I also like that they make the night sky very clear and it's conflicting to what's actually going to happen. We're going to become dragon paste while it's a nice, beautiful night sky out. I do like how they did the shading on the dragon's underbelly and scales too. So as far as what the card does, 6 mana, 5/5 flying. It's a bit heavy, but like I said, red does not have a lot of flying creatures, and it has the fire breathing ability. So once you have all that mana to bump into it, you're going to hit them for a lot more than 5. While it's true most dragons are cool, the Shivan dragon seems to take particular glee in the misery of others, often tormenting its victims much like a cat plays with a mouse before delivering the final blow. You'll find out that a lot of my favorite cards from the sets are most often going to be a dragon. Simulacrum, 2 mana, Simulacrum? I can't pronounce that. I don't know the correct pronunciation. 2 mana, all damage done to you so far this turn is instead redirected to one of your creatures. If this damage kills the creature, it can be regenerated. Okay, I gotta see what it says. You gain life equal to the damage dealt to you this turn. Simulacrum deals damage to target creature you control equal to the damage dealt to you this turn. Okay, I did not know this card existed. It is a bit misleading because it's like this is a clone, but I guess what happened is this is the player and he switched places with one of his creatures and his creatures took the damage. So his creature's dying instead of the owner here who's unharmed and actually healthier. So the artwork makes sense now that I think about it. Sinkhole, this card was definitely, for just 2 mana, you get to destroy any land. So if you get to go first and you have like a swamp and a Mox jet, you can just sinkhole your opponent's first land and they're already set behind. This is definitely one of the most overpowered land destruction cards, especially if it's paired with a land called Strip Mine. I don't know if Strip Mines was part of the course of Alpha or Beta or not. I think it was in Antiquities, which is the following set afterwards. We'll find out though. Siren's Call for 1 blue. All of your opponent's creatures that can attack this turn must do so. Any non-wall creatures that cannot attack are destroyed at the end of the turn. Creatures who are affected by summoning sickness are unaffected by this card. Another blue would eventually get cards to goad the opponent to get force creatures to attack, but the fact that destroying them if they can't attack for any reason that ability has kind of gone away for blue. Sleight of Mind. For 1 blue, can change the text of a card by changing colors. Again, you can use this with like blue Elemental Blast or red Elemental Blast to change the color corresponding on whatever cards you have out. If your opponent was using Circle of Protection, you could use Sleight of Mind to change the color from what they had originally were using to any one of your choice to kind of nullify their Circle of Protection. Smoke, 2-mana enchantment. Each player can only untap 1 creature during their untap phase. This was a really good strategy to use against decks that had strategy to overrun you with creatures. This is an iconic card to this day, Sol Ring. For 1 mana, you could cast it, and then you could just tap it for 2 colorless mana. Definitely a staple in commander decks and a lot of mana ramping. Sol Ring, I think, was restricted to where you could only have 1 of it in a deck. It was definitely overshadowed by the Power 9, but it's still a very powerful card that'll probably never see standard again, just because of how powerful it is. Soulnet. Oh, look at this person, this Banshee's face is like, ooh! You tap it, you gain 1 life every time a creature is destroyed, unless it was regenerated. Wait, you don't tap. Whenever a creature dies, you may pay 1 colorless. If you do, you gain a life. Spell Blast. You have to pay X in a blue. X is the mana cost of the spell that you're countering. This is a very infamous card, Stasis. If you want to make the game unfun, play Stasis. Players do not get to untap their permanents. The owner of Stasis must pay a blue, otherwise Stasis is destroyed. That'll definitely shut down the game. I had a Stasis deck before that I used. My friends would hate it, so I never used it anymore because they would just immediately concede. And then somebody else who went to my local card shop, I tried saying store and shop at the same time, ran a Stasis deck and nobody wanted to face it just because it was a very unfun card. I don't think it'll ever be reprinted again just because of how unfun it is. Steel Artifact, 4 mana. You put it on an artifact. You control the artifact until the enchantment is discarded. If the target artifact was tapped, you may untap it. It's just like Steel Enchantment, except literally Steel Artifact. Stone Giant, 4 mana, 3/4. Tap to make one of your own creatures flying until end of turn. Okay, I gotta reread that. Tap him. Target creature you control with toughness lessens Stone Giant's power. Gain flying until end of turn. Destroy that creature at the beginning of the next end step. So essentially, the Stone Giant throws the creature, giving it flying until end of turn. That's a pretty clever way of doing things. Now, Stone Giant actually looks like a giant. Stone Rain. Man, this guy's in pain. Getting rained by stones. Destroy target land. This is the basic red land destruction card. Stream of Life. Target player gains X life. I did have this card and I used it in Elves a lot. I like the artwork. The artwork is really pretty. I did not know Urza had sunglasses. I knew Urza had glasses, but not sunglasses. White mana in your mana pool can either be used as white or red. I did not know they had that filter. Here's the swamp. Ironically, the swamp, it doesn't look dark, but it's like snowy and gloomy and foggy. But there's more white on this card than there is black. but these were the original swamps. This one's a bit darker tone, and then this one's definitely more dark and probably my favorite. Swords to Plowshare is a very popular removal spell. For only 1 white mana, you exile a creature from the game. Its controller gains life equal to the creature's power, though. But it removes it from the game. It stops it from killing you. So what if your opponent gains little life? If you just removed a creature for 1 white mana, that's like a really good deal. It's one of the best removal cards in the game. Here's Taiga, the red and green dual land. I like Ron Spencer. Ron Spencer is my favorite Magic the Gathering artist. Here's Terror. I don't know what this person saw, but he is definitely terrified. Destroy target creature. That creature cannot be regenerated. Really good removal card for black. However, you cannot destroy a artifact or a black creature. That's the only downside to that card. The Hive. 5 mana. You can pay 5 to create a giant wasp, which is a 1/1 flying creature. The wasps are tokens. They cannot attack the turn they were created. Wasps like artifact never except they are more familiar to say if that was destroyed. The wasp must still be. Okay, so the tokens stay even if the hive is destroyed. It's very expensive for a 1/1 flying, but in a control deck that has good mana curve, it guarantees that you always have a creature out, and you can sacrifice the wasps to Lord of the Pit if you have to. Okay, here's my boy, the Thicket Basilisk. I use Thicket Basilisk a lot in my first competitive green deck. I would put Lure on him. Any non-wall creature blocking the Basilisk is destroyed, as well as creatures it's blocked by. And then I would put Regeneration on it too. Nowadays standards, that's not a great strategy because I have so many cards on one card, and if somebody plays a kill spell on my Thicket Basilisk before I'm able to regenerate it, and I just lost 3 cards to 1, and that's called card advantage. Do I like Thicket Basilisk better than Sheevan Dragon? I am going to have to say yes because I used the Thicket Basilisk more than I did use the Sheevan Dragon. Even though Sheevan Dragon is a better card, 1 for 1, I had more success with Thicket Basilisk, and it has a better place in my heart. So Thicket Basilisk is my current favorite card from the Alpha/Beta set. Thought-Lace changes the color of a card to blue. Throne of Bone. This guy looks weird. It sounds funny. You gain 1 life anytime a black spell is played if you cast 1. Timberwolves, 1 green mana. They have banding, and they're just a 1/1. Though many think of wolves as solitary predators, they are actually extremely social animals. During a hunt, they often call to each other, which can be quite unsettling for their prey. There should be like 2 mana 2/2, but I guess then the Grizzly Bears were the 2/2, so I could see why. Time Twister. I've never seen this card before. What happened to this guy? Is his armor rotting off or something? He looks like he just spilled a big plate of spaghetti. 3 mana, set Time Twister aside into a new graveyard pile. Shuffle your hand, library, and graveyard together into a new library and draw a new hand of 7 cards. All cards in play stay where they are. Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into your library, then draws 7 cards. Then put Time Twister into its graveyard. I'm surprised that you just don't exile Time Twister. Time Vault. I've never seen this card either. I don't know who these 2 people are. What is this? An egg? A weird hourglass? I know he has an hourglass. He has a hammer. Did they take the glass out of this? I think that's what they did. Anyway, what does this do? Time Ball, it's 2 mana. Tap to gain an additional turn after this one. Time Ball doesn't untap during your untap step. To untap it, you must skip a turn. Time Ball enters the battlefield tap. Interesting. I never knew this card existed. Then he says, Folago is your favorite. Who's Folago? Is Folago that? No, that was Gaia's Leech. Here's part of the Power 9 Time Walk. For just 2 mana, you can take an extra turn. So they had that one card that I showed earlier, Regrowth. Return target card from your graveyard to your hand. You can use Time Walk. Imagine having 4 Time Walks and 4 Regrowth. You use Time Walk. You take your extra turn. You use Regrowth to bring back Time Walk. You cast Time Walk again, giving you another extra turn. You could take infinite turns with Isochron Scepter if you exile Time Walk, but Isochron Scepter is a card that's not going to show up until way into Magic's future in Mirrodin, so I won't get into that one. Tranquility, 3 mana, destroy all enchantments in play. This looks like a golf course. Tropical Island. This is the the green-blue dual land. Almost looks like a regular island. It's just a bit more overgrowth. Tsunami, destroy all islands. This little cartoon castle is going to be flooded by these Asian waves. Tundra's the blue-white dual land. You can see some elk, I guess, or reindeer or something. Tunnel, destroy target wall. I guess walls were a big deal back in the day. Twiddle, for 1 blue, you may tap or untap target land, creature, or artifact. The artwork is weird. 2-headed giant of four eyes, Foreezy. Trample, 4/4. He may block 2 attacking creatures, divide damage between them however the controller likes. None know if the giant is a result of aberrant magic, Siamese twins, or a mentalist schizophrenia. Eventually, we would see a 2-headed dragon in Morgania Masks. Underground Sea, black-blue. Unholy Strength, the opposite of Holy Strength. This card would receive some criticism due to the burning pentagram in the background. As the card would get reprinted, it would lose the pentagram, and it would just have a blank background. I actually, when I was in middle school and we would play cards once the class was over, I actually had a teacher take away my cards because she thought they were satanic. And I had to explain to her that it's just a card game. It's not like we were summoning any demons or evil spirits at the school. To which she gave me my cards back, but she told me she was religious and she just didn't want to see those cards again. Unsummon for 1 blue. This was the first blue card to return a creature to its owner's hand. I didn't give this card. Oh, here it is. Return target creature to owner's hand. Uthden Troll. This is a classic favorite of mine, just not as good as like think of Basilisk or Crawa. 3 mana 2/2 regenerates for run red. This is probably, I don't know of many solid red creatures that do regenerate other than the Sedge and the Sea the Upton Trolls. Oi, 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 me got a hurt in here. Oi, 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 me smell a ting is near. Gonna bash and gonna nosh, and the hurt will disappear. Traditional. But trolls are now in green. I guess they went from the mountains to the forests. For Durin Enchantress, 3 mana 0/2. The Enchantress is in play, you may immediately draw a card from your library each time you cast an enchantment. I did not know that they had the Enchantress card in the first set of Magic. That's interesting. Some say Magic was first practiced by women who have always felt strong ties to the land. Vesuvian Doppelganger, 5 mana. You may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except it doesn't copy the creature's color. And it has at the beginning of your upkeep, you may have this creature become a copy of target creature, except it doesn't copy the creature and it still has this ability. So it's a constant changing clone. Oh, thank you for the clarification, Vinny. I forgot it is only instance. So what I said about Isochron Scepter was incorrect. That combo would not work. Here's a George Clooney looking veteran bodyguard. 5 mana, 2/5. Unless bodyguard is tapped, any damage done to you by unblocked creatures is done to bodyguard. You may not take this damage yourself, though you could prevent it if possible. Good bodyguards are hard to find, mainly because they don't live long. It is definitely an oxymoron. If you're a good bodyguard, then you definitely sacrifice your body to save your client, so to speak. Volcanic Eruption, 3 blue and X. This is something that should have been a red card from what I, but it actually hoses red. Destroy X mountains of your choice and does X damage to each player and each creature in play. I did not know this existed, and I did not know blue. So green has Hurricane with X, red has Earthquake with X, in addition to their other burn spells like Fireball and Disintegrate, and blue has one. So it's cool how the color pies have changed as from Magic's birth. Volcanic Island, the red-blue dual land, and this was the second card that accidentally was not printed in Alpha. It was the one dual land that did not make the printing cut. But in Beta, it did. Wall of Air, a 1/5 wall with flying, 3 mana. The standing windstorm can hold us off indefinitely. Ridiculous. Saying nothing, she put a pinch of salt on the table. With a bang, she clapped her hands, and the salt disappeared, blown away. Well, the wall does have one attack, so it could block a 1/1 bird and kill it. Wall of Bone, 3 mana, 1/4, could regenerate. The Wall of Bone is said to be an aspect of the Great Wall in Hell, where the bones of all sinners wait for Ragnarok, when Hela will call them forth for the final battle. Definitely looks creepy. Speaking of creepy, we have Wall of Brambles, 3 mana, 2/3, regenerates. What else when Chaos draws all forces inward to shape a single leaf? Conrad Aiken. We're almost done. The next, I think this is it. No, we have 2 more cards after. Wall of Fire, 0/5, but you can pump its power per red mana. I did run Wall of Fire in my fire breathing decks. Conjured from the bowels of hell, the fiery wall forms an impassable barrier, searing the soul of any creatures attempting to pass through its terrible burst of flames. The artwork looks cool too for fire. It's almost like a stained glass look. Wall of Ice. This is something that should be in either red or blue, not green. 3 mana, 0/7. That's all it is. And through the drifts, the snowy cliffs did send a dismal sheen, nor shapes of men nor beasts we ken. The ice was all between. from Samuel Coleridge, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner. So this would be great in a deck that makes walls able to attack, use their toughness. This wall would swing for 7 damage in Arcadis deck. Speaking of which, Wall of Stone, 3 mana, 0/8. The earth herself lends her strength to these walls of living stone, which possess the stability of ancient mountains. These mighty bulwarks thwart ground-based troops, providing welcome relief for wary warriors who defend their land. Wall of Swords, 4 mana, 3/5 flying. Definitely has decent power and flying for a wall. Just as the evil ones approached to slay Justina, she cast a great spell, imbuing her weapons with her own life force. Thus she fulfilled the prophecy, in the death of your savior you will find salvation. Those swords look like really thick and not being able. I know they're a wall, so they're not used for combat, but I've never seen a sword blade look that thick before. Wall of Water, it's the opposite to Wall of Fire, and it can pump its power. A lot of blue creatures did not have this ability. I know Sea Spirit, which gets reprinted later on, does have this ability too. A deafening roar arose as the fury of an enormous vertical river supplanted our serenity. Eddies turned into whirling geysers, leveling everything in your path. And if you guys can see, there's a wizard casting the Wall of Water from behind here. Good artwork. Wall of Wood, it's from, we got a little creature in these woods here again. It's the little baby wall, 0/3. Everybody knows that to ward off trouble, you knock on wood, but usually it's better to make a wall out of the wood and let the trouble do the knocking. That's funny. Wanderlust, 3 mana. Wanderlust does 1 damage to enchanted creature's controller. I guess the need to explore is so damaging to the soul. War Mammoth, 4 mana, 3/3 trample. I didn't think mammoths could ever hold a candle to a well-trained battle horse. Then one day I turned my back on a drunken soldier. His blow never landed, and each shot flung the brute over 10 meters. Decent, I guess, for its time, but overshadowed by future cards. Warp Artifact. For 2 black, Warp Artifact does 1 damage to enchanted artifact's controller. And this looks like the same artifact from the beginning that does 1 damage to each player during their upkeep. Water Elemental, the opposite of Earth Elemental and Fire Elemental, excuse me. For 5 mana, 5/4, no ability. Unpredictable as the sea itself, water elementals shift without warning from tranquility to tempest. Capricious and fickle, they flow restlessly from one shape to another, expressing their moods with their physical forms. Basic, but decent power for a blue creature. Weakness, this old guy's all feeble now. Enchanted creature gets -2, -1. If a creature's toughness is 1 and it gets -1, it cannot be regenerated because it would come back as still a 0 toughness, and state-based effects would kill the creature. Because anytime a creature's toughness is 0, it goes to the graveyard. Web, for 1 green, enchanted creature gets toughness +2 and can block creatures with flying. Wheel of Fortune, this is a popular card. 3 mana, each player discards their hand and draws 7 cards. This can be used to combo, this can be used to discard your hand to be able to resurrect cards later. All depends on what deck you use it in, but this was a very popular card. White Knight, the counter to, or the mirror opposite to Black Knight. 2 white, protection from black, and first strike. Out of the blackness and stench of the engulfing swamp emerged a shimmering figure. Only the splattered armor and ichor-stained sword hinted at the unfathomable evil the night had just laid waste. White Ward, which does the same thing as all the other color wards did. Target creature gains protection from white. Wild Growth. For 1 green, you put it on one of your lands. Anytime that land becomes tapped, it adds an additional green mana in addition to what it would normally add. Will-o'-the-Wisp. A 0/1 flying regenerating wisp. About, and reel and route, the death fires danced at night. The water, like a witch's oil, is burnt green and blue and white. You really like Samuel Coleridge. So this thing can't really do any damage, but it has flying, so it can block flyers all day long and it can regenerate. So it's almost like a wall. But if you have Bad Moon out, it becomes a 1/2 flyer, and then it can start swinging. I definitely used this card defensively, though, when I had it. Winter Orb. I used a lot of. I used this deck. I had a green mana deck with it. I had a white one with it. It's almost like Stasis, but it's more fair to play around. It costs 2 mana. Players can only untap 1 land during each of their untap phases. Creatures and artifacts can still untap as normal. That's what I would do. I had a bunch of artifacts to give me mana, so I won't care about my lands. I would drop the Winter Orbs and it would lock players out of being able to really play, or it would slow them down massively because they could only untap 1 land a turn. I like how there's like a baby polar bear or child polar bear being like, huh? While his mom is like doing a death war to us. I assume we're looking at. We're the ones in this cave with this winter orb here. Unless the polar bear's roaring at the winter orb, I'm not entirely sure. Wooden Sphere. It's the artifact that every time a green spell is played, you can gain 1 life by paying 1 colorless. Word of Command. For 2 black mana, this kind of looks weird because it's just 2 eyes in the darkness. And these eyes do not look friendly whatsoever. So I wouldn't trust this person or thing. You may look at target opponent's hand and choose a card that an opponent can legally cast. Opponent must play that card immediately, and you make all decisions for it. Let's see what it's oh my god, that's a lot to read. Look at target opponent's hand and choose a card from it. You control that player until Word of Command finishes resolving. The player plays that card if able. While doing so, the player can activate mana abilities only if they're from lands that player controls, only if it's mana they can produce to spend the activated abilities. Oh god, I'm confusing myself. The chosen card is cast as a spell. You control the player while that spell is resolved. So you pretty much, if it's a creature and it has activated abilities, you can use your opponent's land to activate those abilities, and you choose what that creature does, as long as all the moves are still legal. It's like a baby version of Mindslaver, which would be printed and mirrored in years later. And the last 2 cards of the set, Wrath of God. I had mentioned this before. I have never seen this artwork of it, though. I'm used to one where it's like an explosion of light. And there is an explosion of light back here, but the one I'm thinking of is like a white orb, and there's silhouettes of fighters being disintegrated all around. This one is definitely more graphic with a bunch of dead orcs and soldiers and knights bloodied and destroyed, so to speak. But this was White's key card for removal. All creatures in play are destroyed and they cannot be regenerated. It is still one of the most memorable mass removal spells for White to this day. It would eventually be reprinted in future sets, and in Planar Chaos, they would make a black version of it called Damnation. And the last card of the stream, Zombie Master. The Zombie Lord. All zombies in play gain Swamp Walk and Regeneration. Ironically, it does not give all zombies +1/+1 like the Goblin King and the Master of the Pearl Trident. or Lord of Atlantis, I should say, do. But it does give them Swamp Walk and Regeneration. I guess the Regeneration was powerful enough to where the zombies didn't need the +1/+1. They say the zombie master controlled these foul creatures even before his own death, but now that he is one of them, nothing can make them betray him. And this completes our review of the Alpha Beta Magic sets. See if I'm going to pull up Thicket Basilisk and end the stream with him. Nope. We'll get to you, Thicket Basilisk. I'm sure I gotta go through all these Thicket cards. I pass him. Dang, how many versions of Sheltered Thicket are they? Holy crap. There he is. And as you can see, he gets reprinted a couple sets of Magic. But Thicket Basilisk will be documented as my favorite card from Magic's first set, Alpha/Beta/Revised, or Unlimited, I should say. The next review, I'll be reviewing Arabian Nights and Antiquities, Magic's official second and third expansions to the game. So thank you for watching. If you watch this video later on, let me know if you played when Magic first came out, what your favorite cards were, what your favorite moments any of the cards from the set did, and overall what you thought of the set as a whole. I didn't play when the set came out, but I used a third of the cards from it, and I learned how to play Magic from a lot of these cards. And the creators themselves used a lot of these creatures' prototypes to make hundreds and thousands of creatures that are in the game today. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you guys tomorrow for some more Magic the Gathering content. Take care.